off now, confirmed.
Okay, thank you members. Just to Fáilte Roamh, you're all very welcome to this morning's meeting. We do have a quorum and I now call the meeting to order, and I would just like to apologise for a slightly later than scheduled start. So I would remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs are to be taken. Can I remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and please activate the Wi-Fi connection. Please also use your tablet devices discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of cameras and the sensitivity of the microphones in the room. And finally, I'd remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Members of any interest who wish to declare? Andy?
Private sector landlord, Chair.
Yeah, and I will also declare that interest as well.
I declare that interest as well, Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
Charities Commission, I'm chairman of Nice County Charity, which benefit, and of Conor Gaeilge, which are registered as a charity.
Thank you. I'm a registered director of a charity also. So, what we
likewise, director of a charity.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for that, members. Moving on to apologies. Clerk, do we have no apologies? Thank you. Yeah, full attendance. Thank you. Or no apologies received is what I should say there. So in relation to agenda item 2 then, members, Chair's business. So I know it seems a long way off at this point for all of us, but I would like to ask members about our first meeting back post-Christmas recess so that the committee staff can plan and arrange that. Are members content to agree that our first meeting back will take place on Thursday, 16th of January, the week when plenary is scheduled to return?
Great.
Yep. Thank you, members. I also want to acknowledge the final event to mark 100 years of the BBC here on Tuesday evening in the Long Gallery. I wasn't able to attend on the evening and would have liked to have got to it but couldn't get to it, but just like to put on the record the role that the BBC would have played in nurturing artists and talent and many people, media professionals here in the north. And members then on a non-celebratory note, apologies for the extent of papers delivered to you all in table pack yesterday. We were provided yesterday with a copy of the draft housing strategy, which is page 4 of your table papers. I have to say, members, the pressures on housing and the need for the housing supply strategy has been raised by this committee on multiple occasions, very, very many times, dating right back to the start of this committee's work in this mandate. We made inquiries on the 15th of the 3rd. We also, in April, actually sought information on the housing supply strategy specifically, asking about social rents and affordability concerns. In June, we asked for a specific timeline in bringing forward the housing supply strategy, and at that point to include information in relation to rural supply areas. So it's been asked repeatedly and flagged by this committee to the department that we want to be involved and see what's in that strategy. Housing supply and associated issues is something we've asked about on numerous occasions and directly to the Minister in person less than 1 month ago. We have been provided with an embargoed copy of the draft strategy, which we are being advised will go to the Executive on the 5th of December. After the correspondence was received yesterday, committee staff asked the department officials to brief us at either the meeting on the 28th of November or the 5th of December. And we have been informed that officials cannot brief the committee on a strategy that hasn't secured executive agreement. Officials have offered to brief the committee at the earliest opportunity following executive agreement, and I need to put on the record that committee staff here also offered to facilitate a closed session, even if that was, if for some reason the department deemed that there was an issue. I'll go to members to see if there's any comment. And I see Kelly, you have a hand raised there.
Yeah, Chair, I'm very frustrated that the department won't even consider a closed session with the committee. It feels like the committee's scrutiny role is again being ignored. I'm very aware that there are other organisations who have been involved with the department who know the content of the strategy and they... Sorry, it looked as if I would be muted. Sorry, Chair, just to say that I'm very disappointed. I'm not sure how much you heard there because I think the external factors muted me. It's very disappointing
You
that
were
they're
just,
not coming.
sorry, Kelly, just to let you know, you had just said that external bodies or external organisations, that's where you were at when we
Oh, sorry.
lost you.
So there's external bodies that do know the content of the housing supply strategy and have known the content. It seems to be for a few weeks, if not longer. I think it's very disrespectful of the department not to provide a closed session meeting, given the fact that they have provided us with the papers in advance of the executive approval. We understand as a committee, all of us understand that the executive has to give approval before this goes public. But if they do give approval, then that goes out. But surely we should get a briefing. I would ask that we write again as a committee and maybe consider using the route of asking for a witness if they still are determined to turn us down, because this isn't good enough. You know, this is very important, and our job is to scrutinise and to provide support for the minister. Surely he would be looking for the support from the committee.
Thank you, Kelly. So I have, just to say that Morris Bradley has joined us on Zoom, and Brian is indicating. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, well, I look forward to having a briefing on the draft, the draft housing supply strategy. I do view this as a courtesy to the committee that we've been given the sight of the draft, but it has yet to go for executive approval, so it's not approved to go public. So I think it gives us a chance to read through it, but I would say it is appropriate that we will properly consider it, and discuss it, whether in public or in closed sessions, but simply in a public session once it is approved by the executive, and then we will have the same opportunity as everyone else. So I don't share the criticism that others are trying to make. I think that the committee actually has been given the opportunity to see it in advance, but it has to go for executive approval, and there are implications of the housing strategy across other departments, and as we've discussed in our meetings. So I don't share in the criticism. I see it as a courtesy to the committee that we've been given the opportunity to read it in advance, but I don't think we should be discussing it in public today because it has yet to get executive approval. I understand the Minister is hoping to be able to release it, to launch it before Christmas if possible, depending on what happens at the executive table, but if not, early in the new year. So I don't think we'll have long to wait.
Thank you, Brian. Ciara?
Well, I would need to concur with Kelly, to be honest. I think it's critically important. As you know, we've been continuously been asking. This was out for draft consultation back in 2021. It's a key area of our work, and a lot of work was put into it, and we've continuously asked. I myself, even at the last committee meeting where the Minister was present, pushed him for it in October, and he did. I will not quote him, but in the coming weeks, hopefully it'll move forward. As of yesterday morning, at 9:30 yesterday morning, I put in a written question to see if it was coming by the end of the month. I think it's critical. I do appreciate that we now have it to review, but I would also appreciate the department coming to us, and maybe if it's even a closed session, that's fine. But if other organisations are fully aware and are able to have discourse with members of a committee who aren't aware, I think it's just a bit disingenuous, to be honest, as a member of this committee, not being able to have discussion with the department on the draft housing supply strategy.
Thank you, Ciara. Kelly?
Apologies, Chair, I was just getting myself off mute. I have to say, Brian, just addressing Brian's concerns, the department released those papers extraordinarily late for this committee meeting. They are embargoed, so everybody knows exactly what we're supposed to do with embargoed papers, and we don't discuss the content in public session. But I have to say, we're not the general public. We're elected members to the Assembly, and we're sitting on a scrutiny committee that has a statutory function within the Northern Ireland Assembly. If the department keeps on providing us with papers last minute, it shows a disrespect for this committee. We are the scrutiny committee. We are here also as part of our job to support the work of the Minister and the department. If they're going to continue to treat us this way, then I think as a committee we should take and make a decision about these late papers. But for the department to know that they have issued us with these papers in advance of a committee meeting and to prevent us from being able to ask questions, whether it's embargoed or not. I just wonder why then did they provide us with the papers in the first place? They've been able to discuss the content of this strategy with external bodies who took part with the department, and it's probably right that they have that information. But to provide it to a scrutiny committee and then not allow us to scrutinise, irrespective of embargo or not, why did they bother giving us the papers?
Okay, thank you, members. So that is committee's views are noted there in that regard. I also am moving on then. I have been considering recent events and the timing more generally of letters and papers being received by the committee, including the October Monitoring Round letter, which wasn't forwarded last week as a result of a mistake, we're told, yet the subject of a ministerial statement this week. So I wanted to seek committee views. I think there's been a series of issues like that. I noted the Minister yesterday spent a considerable amount of time on several radio programmes, and there was considerable information shared in those. I have requested transcripts of both of those interviews for committee members' information, and we'll forward those once they're available. But I would like to take members' views in relation to this overall situation around whether we ask the Permanent Secretary and the Deputy Secretaries to attend committee to discuss communications, working with the committee and the expectations of this committee. What are members' views, please? Sian?
Yeah, I mentioned in the Assembly on Tuesday morning with the statement we were given, what came through 50 minutes before the statement came through to all MLAs, 50 minutes before the statement was due to be put forward in the Assembly. That doesn't give us enough time as a committee to understand where he's coming from, to get the detail, to really prepare adequate scrutiny for that statement. And as I mentioned in the chamber, I was getting screenshots telling me that the Minister was coming before the Assembly the night before because it was put into local Facebook groups. And I, as a committee member, did not know that the Minister was making a statement. I don't think that's appropriate. It makes our job very difficult, as Kelly said, to both scrutinise and support the Minister. It doesn't give us adequate time to prepare or to scrutinise or to understand the crux of some of these issues. And it's not a good place for a committee to be in when the Minister seems to actively work against the committee at times.
Melissa?
Quite clearly, it is an issue of communication within this committee in terms of how does it the Minister relates to the committee in itself. And I think that rather than us talking around it continuously, we really do need to grasp the nettle here and have the Permanent Secretary and that on here and just clarify just what in fact is their expectations of us and our expectations of them, and that we do address the issue and we nip it in the bud now. Other than that, it's going to continually undermine the confidence of this committee and its own work that it's doing.
Yeah, and I have to say, I do think in terms of his accounting officer role, the issues were raised yesterday around spend. In terms of the US trip, issues were raised in the media yesterday around the meeting with the LCC, and I would like to hear the Permanent Secretary's take on issues like that. Daniel?
Yeah, just to share what other committee members have raised, I think the Minister has a particular style that doesn't fit comfortably with me and other members, and this isn't the first of a series of approaches that we've seen that is entirely unacceptable by this Minister. He has already been pulled by the Speaker of the House for how written questions have been answered from members and his responses in that regard, let alone to what we would expect as committee members. Maybe he needs to be reminded, Chair, of what is expected of him as Minister in terms of his approach and attitude towards members of this committee. And maybe it's something that actually should probably be raised with the Speaker.
Kelly, is that hand back up again, or is that from previous? Yeah, go ahead.
No,
Kelly,
it's back up again. I think it would be worthwhile even if the committee had a copy of the requirements about submissions of papers from departments and what the expectation is. I believe that there is a certain period of time, and I think because our meeting's on a Thursday, that papers should be received to the clerks no later, I think, than Monday. So there is written details on that. It's not in standing orders, but there are written details about how a minister and how a department is supposed to communicate with a committee to enable appropriate scrutiny. If we could get a copy of that, and certainly to ask I would support asking the Permanent Secretary or other civil servant staff from the department to come forward to explain why this has consistently been broken by this department in this term. It wasn't the same in the last mandate. I have to say this is surprising in this mandate, and it would be very useful to get clarification as to why this time the department feels it's necessary to set aside those procedures.
Thank you. Brian?
Yep, certainly. I welcome if we can get papers at as early a stage as possible. It helps us in our role both at committee and any announcements. I do note that the winter fuel payment that the Minister announced, having secured funding from the Executive, is a good news story, and that was rightly announced in the Chamber. The Minister had said that he would be making an announcement, but I can think of a number of occasions in which other ministers have actually made announcements to the media before they're brought to the Assembly Chamber. So I think, in fairness to the Minister, he did make his announcement in the Assembly Chamber, not in advance to the media, and that is respecting the Assembly role. I welcome if we can get papers at the earliest stage. We did receive his papers. That's not unusual to only receive papers, the text of the announcement on the morning that has taken place, so people can argue about how long, but we
Brian,
did
it's in
receive it
standing
advance.
orders.
Yeah, and
it's a breach of the rules of the
Chair
I'm
Kelly?
speaking.
Kelly,
Chair.
through the chair.
Yeah, I do find I get interrupted by Kelly Armstrong on a number of occasions, Chair. I appreciate if comments could be directed through the Chair.
Chair, can I make a comment then?
I'll bring you in when Brian finishes.
Thank you, Chair. I was speaking, and I was just commenting about how I tend to get interrupted by some members, and I hope they will respect your role as chairperson. As I say, I think this was a good news story. I appreciate people want to find fault. We have been given an advance embargo copy of the housing supply strategy, and that shows that information has been provided to committee. But I think the vast majority of the public recognise this was a good news story. I appreciate some committee members, and maybe for party political purposes, want to try and find fault with processes or timescales. But I think the vast majority of the public will say this was a good news story, and it was announced in the Assembly Chamber as it should have been, and we all had opportunity to pose questions to the Minister and to tease out some of the details.
Thank you. Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologise, Brian, for butting into you. I'm quite used to this weather. Having DUP members criticising women, but just to say, Chair, that there are rules and processes of the Northern Ireland Assembly set out in standing orders. It's not for a member to be accused of making a complaint when we're simply asking for the rules of this place to be upheld. And Chair, just to confirm, the Chairperson's Liaison Group has raised concern about the amount of time that ministers and departments are not submitting to papers on time. This is something that is going badly wrong with our committee processes. For a member of a committee to be defending departments for not following due process is a bit rich. But Chair, what I would do is I would ask perhaps if we can get confirmation from the DALO or from the department what their understanding of the procedures are, and that we each get a copy of the written procedure of when the departments are expected and supposed to be submitting the papers to us.
Okay, thank you, and I am keen to focus on the work of this committee, and in relation to this meeting, this discussion is the work of this committee. Daniel, briefly, please.
I share the comments by Kelly, and I do think it is regrettable, Chair, that members of this committee would seek to protect their minister instead of actually appreciating that this is not acceptable. We have to be honest. Unfortunately, some members in the House and in this committee don't see when there's a very clear problem here. It's been recognised widely across this committee. We are raising it today. The minister would do well, and the department, to take heed of our concerns, because they do not want us on the opposite side of them. We are here to facilitate and to assist them where we will not be used either. So I think Kelly has outlined very clearly what is expected from standing orders, and the Minister and indeed his colleagues would do well to heed those procedures.
Yep. Yeah, so we'll go to Andy first then.
Yeah, Chair. Obviously, as a committee, we want to work effectively and constructively, and obviously standing orders do lay out when a minister is meant to provide a statement, and just looking at them there, it states as soon as possible or at least 30 minutes before the statement is due to be made. And not to labour the point, and I think obviously we may, as a committee, want to go back to the department and just emphasise that we'd be keen that the department provide those statements, given the detail of them, a lot sooner. But on this occasion, and not the defence, not my place to have to defend the minister, but I think it was in line with standing orders on this occasion. But certainly I would want to get it in a much more timely manner beyond that half an hour. That should not be what a department is looking to achieve in terms of the 30 minutes. But on this occasion, certainly I think from what I can see, from when I received the statement and when the statement was delivered, it was within the context of standing orders.
Yep. Yeah, so we had asked that last week. I will say within the 30 minutes, Andy, you're probably right in that context. However, the as soon as possible is in question, given the minister tweeted about it the afternoon before. So I think the as soon as possible is in query there. Ciara?
No, I just want to come back on Brian, where you says where people wish to find fault. I would take offence by that. I'm not here to find fault with ministers. I'm here to do my job as a committee member, to actually support the minister, to support the department, but also scrutinise. So I just want to put that on record, that I don't think that was an appropriate statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. And there is, I think, and this is something of concern as well. You know, there is an issue around legislation around the winter fuel payment. It was mentioned in relation to the statement. Clearly, there's a question mark around the steps that would need to be taken, including the committee steps that would need to be taken in legislation, and whether that will facilitate that payment being made this winter, which and during the cold spell of the winter. So there's lots of issues around time in relation to time being of the essence in that respect. Very briefly, Dan.
Just briefly on that point as well, Chair. You know, and the statement, any help to people in difficult conditions is to be welcomed, but you know, this has been heralded as some great benefit to people, which it's not going to be. It's not going to be paid to March. It's £100. It's hardly going to scrape the surface. It's not going to support people in the way it should. And the minister, instead of going out and trying to pat himself on the back on this issue for the job that he's supposed to be doing, should be trying to focus in on the root causes of why people are actually struggling to heat their homes or feed their families. Not going out and saying that £100 is going to save the day. I welcome any investment in helping people, just to be put on the record, but £100 is not going to save people this winter, just to be blunt about it.
Okay, final very brief word.
Yeah, just a point of information, Daniel McCrossan is incorrect to say it will not be paid to March, and the Minister made that clear to him in the Assembly chamber. He will be able to get the payment out as quickly as possible, and it'll be paid at the very latest by the end of March, but he expects it to be made much earlier, so it's wrong to imply to people that they'll only get it at the end of March.
But I think we need to drill into that. I have certainly not clear as to when it will be, but anyway, that will be the work of the committee, and that is where scheduling and the delivery of papers in a timely way are all important. So our members agreed. Andy?
Sure, be brief. And just in terms of this, and indeed I welcome the payment and understand the concerns regarding it, but at least it is action, much more so than what others are delivering around the other devolved regions or the other parts of the UK. Just in terms of that, I'm sure other members may well have been contacted as well, but I'm getting contacted by others, non-pensioner households, just asking what support is available to them. And I think we have asked this question before, but I haven't seen anything detailed or definitive coming back. Could we just reinforce that point to the department, because other households who are struggling with a higher cost of living are contacting me saying, you know, what support will be in place for them?
Yep, absolutely, and indeed I would also put on record that welcome any additional help, and indeed put on the record again that I believe the British government were wrong to go about this and should reverse the decision to end the winter fuel payment. So we can write in those terms, Andy, raising that concern around non-pensioner households. Otherwise, our members agreed that we seek to get the permanent secretary to come to committee and whatever other officials. Okay, members agreed. Thank you. Okay, members, agenda item 3 then, draft minutes, which I refer you to at page 6 of your meeting pack. Are members content to agree the minutes of 14th of November as drafted? Content, thank you. Matters arising, members then. So, as agreed, you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 18. We'll trial this approach and see if members wish to revert back to our previous approach or a hybrid of the two approaches of handling matters arising. But for now, we've agreed we'll see how this works. So please let me know as we go along, and we can come back to this in the new year. Are there any items then from the table that members wish to discuss further in relation to matters arising? Kelly, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, can I point the committee then to page, if it comes up, 23. It's the response back from Lisburn and Castlereagh Council with regards to the landlord registration scheme. There are a couple of questions that I do have about this, and I was wondering if it might be possible to ask at this stage. I'm not 100% certain if it is appropriate at this stage to ask them, because I don't know whether the Minister has signed this off, but it does seem to be fairly advanced. There are a number of questions about how this register is going to be used. For instance, will all the private rental be listed against their owners? How is enforcement being funded? You know, if any council has to take a legal case against a landlord. And if a landlord, for instance, is based in another council area, will they pay registration for the council area that they personally live in, or the area where the properties are based? It's unclear at this stage. It just would be useful, given the work that Lisburn and Castlereagh Council have done on this, if we could even write to them and ask them those questions. But there are other things that it would be good to tease out to find out how the councils will be approaching this.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Members content with those? Yeah.
Just one other note, I think, and also when the IT system now is getting tendered out and they're looked at, now's the time to actually look at the data that they're currently capturing, and if any improvements need to be made. Maybe there's redundant data that's not being utilised, because there's no point collecting data if it's not being collated and then not being utilised for a useful purpose. So I would be really interested to find out what data, or new data as well, is going to be captured under the system. Has that been looked at?
Yeah, thank you. Clerk, have you got the detail of that? Members agreed, okay. Any other issues from matters raising, members?
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
Chair.
Sean,
It was
go
just, I think it's page 30, the Charity Commission response. I suppose for me, it's just really wondering why that scheme of delegation hasn't yet been implemented, given that it does have the potential to improve efficiency, productivity, and I suppose then who is responsible for the delays in development and implementing that scheme that was outlined in the Charities Act 2022. If we could just get some clarity on that, I suppose. And then my third thing is just really what steps are being taken to expedite that process.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Charity Commission, why the delay in implementing the scheme?
Yeah, and who's responsible for that scheme of delegation?
Thank you, Sean.
Or can I just declare an interest as charity trustee?
Okay, okay, members, thank you. So moving on then to correspondence, members, which is contained in your memo at page 50. The memo is contained at page 53, and there's a table correspondence memo at page 58 of the table papers. At pages 49 to 54 in table papers, there's a copy of the October monitoring round paper. We will receive a briefing on this at our meeting on the 5th of December, and if you're agreed, members, we will bring this paper back for that session. So, members agreed that we bring that back? And then, do members have any comments on any other item of correspondence?
Just
Daniel?
Page 67, Chair, the correspondence from the Finance Committee in relation to the references made to Micah and Pyrite, but at the bottom of it, it says that they don't wish to carry forward any further works because they don't believe that there's a systemic issue here. But the real question for the Department of Communities is, how do they know that if they haven't carried out proper inspections of properties that may be affected? There's 6 social homes that they referenced here that are directly within, I suppose, the responsibility of the department. But I am fairly certain, as I'm sure other colleagues will be, that there are a number of properties that are very likely to be affected, particularly in the northwest. And I would be very keen to know, and I think that this committee should write to the department asking what they have done to actually investigate if there is any traces of pyrite or mica or other relevant defective block chemicals in properties across the relevant affected areas. because I just don't think that that response is suitable. The DFC would reiterate that currently there is no evidence, but how can they back up that if they've carried out no investigations? What work have they done? And I think we need to be very careful. Chair, I'm very concerned about this, that this is going to emerge over the next number of years. I've been in a number of homes that are affected. People are afraid to come forward because there's no support available or very little information. Derry and Strabane District Council have a registration process where you register your property if you believe it's affected, but really that's as far as anything has ever went. So I think we need to delve further into this, to be honest.
Thank you, Malisha.
I would just reiterate what Emily McCrossan just has said there, that in our area, in particular in the northwest, we're only too well aware of it, and that in many cases, where people have imported blocks from Cassidy's to do the building and that of their homes. And in some cases, it's not just a case of an individual importing blocks, but that where a number of houses have been developed by a developer, and they've found themselves again too just affected by these inferior blocks. Now, I was surprised at the figures quoted just in our papers, because again, just as Daniel has said there, that I'm aware of more than 6 people who will say have been affected by this, and quite rightly, just as Daniel has pointed out as well, people are nearly afraid to say that they are affected by it, because that in turn will impact on them in terms of both insurance and even the resale of their house or anything else like it. So I do think that further investigation should be carried out there. Though, in saying all of that, I find it difficult to maybe understand what role it is that that the Northern Ireland authorities can have when the blocks that have been imported from the Republic of Ireland. And I know that for my own party, that they themselves are very involved in this whole issue, in Donegal in particular, and they also are concerned then too on how it is that it impacts on Northern residents at the same time. But again, as I say, I don't have that understanding of how it is maybe they will have a role there, so I'd appreciate if we could have some kind of clarity on that issue as well.
Chair, just to add to that, and this is what's critical, as Malisha and Ciara will know very well, the border is free-flowing, it's non-existent. We travel across it quite freely on a daily basis, and products and services and all sorts of things do likewise. Given how Donegal has been affected, it's only common sense to assume that those blocks are right across Strabane, Castlederg, as far as Omagh, and certainly in Derry. They didn't stop at the border. There's no regulation of these products in that regard, and organically, unfortunately, they have ended up in the north. This may not have emerged as a wide-scale problem just yet, but the real reason, similarly to Donegal, is that people are sitting on this because they're afraid of the huge impact it will have on their homes, on their families, on their livelihoods, on their financial freedom, if you like, because this would really lock them into a very difficult situation, particularly when there's no clear support available. And if the department are saying there's no evidence, they need to support that claim that there's no evidence, because I don't see that they've done anything to identify that this is a risk, because this is something that eventually could be a major, major problem, and I think that there should be work ongoing now to identify the huge risk that's there.
Thank you. Brian?
Well, through the chair, I would ask Daniel McCrossan, is he aware of evidence? He says he's been in a number of homes. Can he clarify, is he talking about homes in Northern Ireland?
Yes.
The reply from the department says that they're working with Derry City and Strabane District Council, and 6 social homes have been remedied, and DFC is aware of 1 private homeowner affected by defective blocks. They say there's currently no evidence to suggest defective blocks posed a systemic issue across Northern Ireland. So if he is aware of properties, because they're reporting 6 social and 1 private, has he encouraged those homeowners to register then with the District Council and with DFC? Because they're the relevant authorities taking this forward.
The relevant authorities, Chair, but the difficulty with this, if you imagine what many people in Donegal have had to go through to get to where they are today, and the scheme is still not perfect or ideal, but for a very long time homes were crumbling around them. There was no support mechanism whatsoever until ultimately it was recognised that there's a systemic issue here, and the government have intervened, and there's a huge campaign around it because we realised how wide scale the problem was. But at the very beginning, it was similar to the north. It didn't come out until houses were literally crumbling down around people. The people that I've spoken to in my constituency are very hesitant to come forward, because the moment that they do so, their house, they will not be able to sell it, they'll not be able to do anything with it. It'll have major implications for them. The scheme that's set up by Derry and Strabane District Council was brought about, and Militia maybe clarify this for me as well, because the councillors proposed that a scheme be set up to register the extent of it. But that's as far as it goes. It's literally get in and saying, I believe my house has been affected by defective blocks. That's it. What's the benefit to the person that goes in and does that? Nothing. It actually puts them in a very, very serious situation. So there's no incentive for people to come forward. People are afraid to come forward. But it's very obvious, Chair, if I walk around parts of my constituency, and Militia will say this, and Keir as well, you can see it to the naked eye, actually, the very grave impact that this is having on quite a number of new build properties in these relevant constituencies.
So listen, I do think that's concern. The concerns are well noted there, and I think it's relevant that we advise and write to the department to seek further information and to flag to them that there could be a wider concern that is yet uncovered but needs to be worked upon.
Just quickly on Brian's point. Brian, actually I have one family in my area, and that UTV actually wished to do a piece on it, and the reporter in that there wanted to meet with the family and put out on television. I attempted to operate more or less as a conduit between the family and the UTV, but in fact the family were saying no way. For that very reason, just as outlined there, that they didn't want to put then the risk of them not being able to sell their property or whatever at risk. And that's a very, very common feature. So it does happen. So whenever you say that, we should be maybe making the authorities aware, I know that someone comes to me in confidence, explains to me their problem, I would wait for their permission on whether or not I should be highlighting it any further.
Okay, I'll go back to you, Brian. I want to hear
I just want to note, they mentioned only the one case, but actually there was up to 10 suspected cases. However, it's up to the individual household, as other colleagues have mentioned, for them to go out and spend £7,000 to get a test done, which may say as they no longer live in their home, but there is currently nothing available at the moment to support those households. So that's probably the reason why. I have wrote to the department a few weeks back just in relation to the liaison and correspondence they have had recently with Derry City and Strabane District Council, because I've met with building control as well. There's actually applications for extensions to homes, and when they're going out to get assessed, it's suspected that they do have defective blocks. So it is an issue that we would not want to see happen, but the reality is we have many households are sitting in fear that they do have, but to get it confirmed in writing, they have no way out. They're basically homeless. So I think it's a key issue we need to keep an eye on, and we need to constantly have correspondence with the department, particularly through Derry City and Strabane District Council, but as it may also affect the likes of all the border counties. It could be impacting on them, and verbally you speak to people and they're constantly saying they believe that particular estate has it, that particular estate has it, but if nobody's going to come forward to confirm it because there's no support there for them, so it's you can understand the current situation.
Finally, briefly, Brian.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, I should have associated Militia with my earlier comment about if people know, and Keir as well, if they are aware of cases. I mean, it's similar to when there's policing issues. Police will say if issues aren't reported, then it's not recognised and that resources won't be deployed. There needs to be evidence, a recognition of the scale. If members are saying that they're aware of cases, I mean, they need to communicate that to the council in the first place. And maybe they are doing that in confidence, but we need to get recognition. If it's more widespread than the reply that we have been given is, if you're aware that it's more widespread than that, then that needs to be communicated.
Okay, no, I think that's a very clear concern there. I think the crux of it to me appears from the discussion that we need to provide reassurance and support to families to allow them to seek help and to get the full understanding of the case, of the issue and the details involved. Morris, you have a hand raised. Mute. You're still on mute. Yeah, go ahead now, Morris. Yeah.
Well, I've been listening intently to the discussion there, and it's like all things in life. If you do not know there's a problem, you will not try and fix it. So I would appeal to members, if they know any householders who have problems with these blocks, that they encourage them to come forward and seek help, rather than go the other way around it, provide help for those who may not need it. So yeah, broad agreement, but we need to be careful how we go about it. If you need help, you need to raise your hand. Okay, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Morris. So just two brief correspondence items I want to flag up. The one is on the from the Committee on the Bereavement Services and the Tell Us Once. I think that is a crucial. So that's for people where there's a bereavement in a family, that agencies coordinate to so that families don't have to repeatedly tell every agency involved with care or benefits or whatever. So I certainly would encourage all departments to work at pace together to try to come up with a similar kind of approach, which would be a less work intensive on departments, hopefully, as well as less stress and strain for families in what is already a very difficult situation. So, Melissa?
And just on that point too, I do think that the way this is resolved is basically more or less what happens in England itself, where they have at the single point of contact, they then notify all other agencies. Now, because of maybe the way they operate in silos here with our departments and so on, we need maybe that single point of contact, who in turn takes on that responsibility then of contacting our different agencies after that. But to have an expectation that anyone is going to be in a position to go around all the different agencies, that does not happen. So I do think we need to clarify on that and have that single point of contact who take on the responsibility for informing all other interested parties as such.
Yeah. Kelly?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say that I have used the bereavement service before, and it is amazing. It seems to be really connected down to if the person is in receipt of benefits or is a housing executive tenant, and within the community, certainly community's portfolio, all that need to be contacted and all that work is done by a central point. And I know that many families absolutely respect that, and it saves them from having to think about, cancelling benefits and potential problems that can cause. But I'm unclear as to how the other departments would be involved with that. I know that the communities one is you have benefits, so they need to be cancelled. Housing executive tenancies need to be cancelled, and if there's other information about support with funeral payments, they're there to provide that. It maybe would be useful to understand what is being asked to be added into it, because I'm not clear myself from the other departments what it is that they need to be notified of. I'm just unsure on that one.
Yep, thank you, Kelly. Are you content with it?
Are we asking all departments, or are we asking the Department for Communities which services they wish to flag for reference to bereavement service?
I think I asked the Department for Communities in the first instance, do they flag to, for example, health? Yeah. Maybe ask the Department for Communities first, and then we can see if there's any further work to be done in that regard. Daniel?
Similarly to other colleagues, we dealt with the service a couple of times, and I found it quite effective actually and straightforward, because people find it very stressful to have to deal with their loved ones' affairs, particularly so soon after losing them, and fear of accumulating a debt to, I suppose, the department, etc. But I will flag up in relation to how the Department of Communities handles some of these things. Not entirely very sensitive. If someone is in receipt of housing benefit, Chair, for instance, and passes away on a Thursday, their housing benefit stops on the Sunday. That adds huge pressure to families that have just lost a loved one and having to clear out a home, etc., because they automatically are accumulating debt almost immediately within days of their loved one passing away. And I was quite shocked at how blunt that is. And as far as I'm aware, with the housing executive, if you're living in a housing executive or social house, it continues for a number of weeks. So I'm wondering why there is a difference there, because I've had people that are very stressed about how this has actually affected them and the pressure they come under to react in the aftermath of losing someone when they're trying to grieve and get a funeral and everything sorted, when literally within days the housing benefit for that particular property stops. And equally as well, if an individual owes the department money for overpaid benefit, etc., I have seen situations where the department have issued a letter almost on the date of the person's death that lands with the family member thereafter, and they're stressed about this, going, what do I do about this? So I think the Department for Communities really needs to look at their approach around some of the sensitivities in the immediate aftermath of someone's death. It's almost like their first protocol is, well, we need to get ourselves to look after ourselves, you know. And, the housing benefit one has come up time and time again, and adds particular stress, particularly if it's the only person in the house.
Members content to be right on that? Yeah. Thank you. The other thing I want to mention in correspondence is the work that's ongoing on the gender pay gap, and to welcome the fact that that's going to a consultation on Monday. So I think any issue in that is to be welcomed and is urgent work, and I just would encourage everyone to, particularly those impacted negatively, to take part in that consultation and to feed into the work ongoing. Ciara?
And could I just raise, obviously, in relation to correspondence from Homeless Connect for Homeless Awareness Week, obviously it's from the 2nd to the 8th of December, and as you well know, there's a detailed copy of 32 range of different activities, so I'd really encourage everyone to participate. Like Homeless Connect, who obviously are the representative body, do amazing work. There's a secretariat of our all-party group here as well, and as just to acknowledge as well, to thank everyone with regards to Homeless Connect and our cross-party motion for that week as well. But it's really a fantastic week, and it's really, really important to remind us all that homeless isn't inevitable, and we should be doing all that we can across all departments to end homelessness and work together to end homelessness. So,
yeah, and I will flag just also the fact that we will be, in our work on homelessness, we will be taking our committee meeting to Derry on the week of the 12th, and that will be focusing on homelessness. So just to flag the importance of that issue for our committee. Okay, thank you, members. So moving on then to agenda item 6, which is Child Support Enforcement Bill, and this is the clause by clause consideration. So members, the committee will now commence the formal clause by clause consideration of the Child Support Enforcement Bill. The papers for this agenda item start at page 130 in your pack with a copy of the bill. There is a raised paper with answers to our follow-up questions on the bill in your table papers at page 61. Are you content to note and include a copy of the paper in the final report, members?
yes.
Yep. So I will read out the title of the clause before I ask the formal question. Department officials are in attendance here today should we have any final queries, and I'd like to welcome Sinead Wiley and John Noble to the table for that purpose. So, members, if you have any final comments, please alert me at that stage before I read out the formal question on the clause as to whether the committee is content with each clause as drafted or amended. So, clause 1 then, rules relating to liability orders. Is the committee content with clause 1 as drafted by the department?
Yes.
Content. Thank you, members. Okay. Moving on to clause 2, commencement and short title. So, is the committee content with clause 2 as drafted by the department?
Yes.
Yeah.
Content, yeah. Thank you. The schedule then, members, schedule amendment of statutory provisions. Is the committee content with the schedule as drafted by the department?
Yes.
Yeah,
Content, thank you. And members, then, that concludes the committee's formal clause by clause consideration of the Child Support Enforcement Bill. I would like to thank the departmental officials, John Noble and Sinead Wiley and John McElwain, for all their support and patience with our queries, and Aveen Baker from the Assembly Bill Office for her support, as well as Eleanor Murphy from RAISE. I would also like to thank the committee staff here in relation to their work in facilitating our scrutiny of this bill. Members, a draft committee report has been included in meeting papers at page 230. I would ask members to take the report away and read it ahead of next week's meeting when we will formally agree it. If you have any suggested changes or amendments, I would ask that you could contact the committee clerk to advise in the interim. So that concludes that item, and I can thank officials and let you go back to your...
Thank you very much.
Thank you for attending. Thank you, Sinead. And John.
Thank you.
Thank you. So members, agenda item 7 then.
Sorry, just before we move on, it's around the child maintenance support services, but not directly linked to that. It's really just about the domestic violence aspect that we have raised on a few occasions, in terms of ensuring that any changes that do take place have victims of survivors of domestic violence in mind, and then around that payment of the liability orders, and whether someone who is trying to protect their own details and trying to make sure that their details are not known to a potential abuser shouldn't have to pay. So I guess it would be useful, because it wasn't directly linked to this particular piece of legislative change. It would be really good, I think, in the future to have a wee look at that, if possible.
Yeah, and
We
can put it in the report, and it probably actually is
in there,
already
I
in.
think,
Yeah,
as a
I think it's in.
recommendation, but we can tighten that up.
Yeah.
About the
Have a look at it as currently drafted, and if there's a way that you want to propose to committee that we amend or whatever, we can look at that next week and include that
Okay.
as part of our consideration. Okay, thank you members. Moving on to agenda item 7, which is a departmental briefing on gambling reform. So members, the briefing paper is in tabled papers at page 73. And I'd now like to welcome the following officials: Kieran Mee and Carol Reid. So Carol, I think it's yourself is maybe going to make an opening statement before we move to questions and answers.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to brief members on the gambling industry. I'm quite conscious that most members weren't here during the last committee whenever the last gambling bill was progressed, nor was I. Actually, Kieran was, but I wasn't. So if you're content, it'll be a very brief background on just what the current regulatory position is, what changed during the last mandate, and then where we are today. So we have set it out in our written briefing. The Department is responsible for setting the regulatory framework under which the gambling industry in Northern Ireland operates. That framework is provided for by the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Northern Ireland Order 1985. The order regulates betting, gaming and amusement activity in Northern Ireland by the courts, by councils and by our department. It does also regulate lotteries, but not the National Lottery, as it's regulated UK-wide. Now, there's another piece of legislation that's relevant to Northern Ireland, but not the responsibility of the department, and that is the Gambling, Licensing and Advertising Act 2014. Now, with the National Lottery, broadcast, advertising and advertising on social media is regulated UK-wide. And under that 2014 Act, it is an offence for an online gambling operator to advertise to people in Northern Ireland without being granted a licence from the Gambling Commission. So jurisdiction in that area lies with the Advertising Standards Authority and with the Gambling Commission itself. So in terms of the changes in recent years, a reform of gambling policy and legislation was initiated during the last Assembly mandate. I think it was acknowledged at that time that the 1985 order, being so old, it's very large, it's complex, and the intention at that time was to deliver what was possible in that short time available. So as a result, the bill was progressed in 2021 and 2022, and it amended certain parts of the 1985 order. So those amendments included new offences in relation to allowing underage gaming. It broadened the definition of cheating at gambling. It imposed powers to impose a statutory levy on gambling operators, a requirement to issue codes of practice for gambling operators, made gambling contracts legally enforceable in law, removed certain restrictions on promotional prize competitions. It raised the maximum ticket price for societies, lotteries, and it allowed bookmakers and bingo clubs to open on Sundays and Good Fridays. And proposals were also put to the then Communities Minister to increase lotteries, gaming and gaming machine stakes and prizes via secondary legislation. However, at the time it was concluded that the increases to gaming stakes and prize limits should be varied depending on the premises in which the gaming has taken place. So they shouldn't necessarily be the same in a betting shop or a gaming centre as it is in a pub where alcohol is available. Now, at the time, it was recognised that the 1985 order wasn't actually written in a way to allow for that, and the previous committee endorsed a proposal then from the department to amend the legislation as the bill progressed, which would then allow different stakes and prize limits for gaming machines to be set dependent on the premises in which they're located. So the bill, including that amendment, was passed by the Assembly in March 2022, and the committee at that time agreed that any changes to stakes and prizes could be heard at a later date. It was acknowledged then that any decision to progress any further reform of primary legislation would be a matter for a new minister and a new executive in a future Assembly. So fast forward to earlier this year, Minister gave his consideration to gambling regulation, and members of the committee were advised of that outcome at the end of April. And that outcome was that it would be impossible for a further bill of the magnitude and complexity that's likely to be required for a bill to be drafted and to have made its way through all of the Assembly scrutiny and legislative processes in this mandate. So the Department does recognise that there are concerns about the adequacy of the existing law here, and members have been advised that although primary legislation can't be progressed, work does continue within the Department, and attention is being focused on what practical measures can be delivered within the framework that exists now in the time remaining in this present Assembly. So work on completing those outstanding pieces of secondary legislation which were agreed by the previous committee is ongoing, and the committee was recently sent a set of proposals for increasing gaming and gaming machine stakes and prize limits in line with those discussed during the previous mandate. I believe they are up for consideration today. The Department also continues to gather and collate very much needed Northern Ireland gambling data to base future decisions on. So that includes data on business turnover, on revenue from betting and gaming duty in Northern Ireland, some licensing figures, and very importantly gambling participation. As part of this, the committee will be aware from our letters in April and May then that we are undertaking a gambling prevalence survey amongst people aged 16 and over in Northern Ireland. The results of this are expected to become available in the new year, and twice as many people are being included in that survey than in the previous survey in 2016.
2016.
So that evidence base is vital in developing future policy. It also helps us aid the Department, aid supporting the Departments of Health and Education as they respectively consider future public health approaches to gambling, tackling gambling harm, and how best to raise school-aged children and young people's awareness of the dangers of gambling. The Minister has also, along with Ministers of Health and Education, written to the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, seeking early engagement on issues around a UK-wide gambling industry levy and gambling advertising. So engagement at an official level has recently been agreed between the three Northern Ireland departments and DCMS. In the meantime, officials here from this department are already in discussion with the Advertising Standards Authority around raising public awareness of the authority's role in respect to gambling, regulating gambling advertise, and how members of the public can raise concerns. And just briefly on that, the Advertising Standards Authority recently have carried out a radio campaign, I believe, in Northern Ireland to raise people's awareness. I think their concern is that actually people in Northern Ireland don't realise that they can complain to the Advertising Standards Authority. So finally, I know members have asked specifically in this briefing for information on the Code of Practice. So the Department is currently consulting on a new industry code. That consultation closes on the 24th of December, and I believe you were provided a copy of that initial code in August. The Department is required to issue one or more codes of practice about the manner, this is the legislative term, about the manner in which facilities for gambling in Northern Ireland are provided. That's whether by the holder of a licence, a permit or a certificate that's been granted under the 1985 order, or by another person, so anybody working on their behalf effectively. So the initial code proposed is it is a measured approach to implementing the Department's obligations. It would have the effect of, I'll just go through the list, prohibiting acceptance of credit payments from customers, banning ATMs from bookmakers' offices, bingo clubs and dedicated amusement and gaming centre premises, requiring age limit notices to be displayed both outside and inside gambling premises, requiring age verification checks to be carried out on prospective gambling customers who appear to be below the legal age for gambling, although the challenge 25 is the reference point for that rather than 18, requiring adherence to the UK fundraising code of practice in relation to society lottery fundraising activities involving children, and requiring a gambling customer self-exclusion scheme to be in place and to be made available to any gambling customer who wishes to self-exclude. So in terms of then what happens if there are any breaches, serious, significant, continuing or multiple breaches of a code will be grounds for revocation or cancellation of a bookmaker's licence, a bookmaking office licence, a track betting licence, a gaming machine certificate, a registration or a club, or an amusement or pleasure permit. So I think it's best that's in a nutshell where we are now. And again, thank you, Chair, and Kieran and I are happy to take any questions then that members might have.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I suppose it has been a feature of committee that there is a concern around that we have fallen significantly behind in terms of other jurisdictions around the legislation, and we're very aware of the impact and the harm that gambling can cause. We are scheduling a brief session with the all-party group on gambling to get under the bonnet of all of that. But can you assure us that it is a priority for the department, and given that the department are not planning to bring forward legislation in this mandate, can you assure us that the work is being done so that in the very early days of the next mandate, that draft legislation will be ready to pick up and go with early in the next mandate?
The work is being done to gather the evidence base so that the evidence will be available to a new minister coming in. But there is no work on a draft bill, so to speak.
And would that not, why is there no work being done on the draft bill?
It would be inappropriate for a minister's policy now to be progressed whenever we know it won't commence in this mandate, and then having that set for a new minister to bring forward if that is not that new minister's policy. I think the committee has been made aware as well of the resource issue within the department. So there wouldn't be the resource available. The size of the bill that is likely to be required is significant.
Yeah, but that's the very reason
Yes.
why I think we should be starting at the earliest possible point. And the minister has indicated that he's not bringing it forward in this mandate, but that it needs to be brought forward in the next mandate. So I would be very concerned if we're being told there'd be a standing start on it again in a new mandate, given how far we are behind. How many officials are working on gambling reform currently?
On gambling within the branch, there are 2 full-time, and then myself.
And this would be a massive piece of legislation.
It could be done in a full mandate. And the idea is then that the evidence that we're trying to build now would be sitting ready to put to a new minister on basically day one, week one.
And it would require a dedicated build team as well. You'd be talking in the region of 15 to 20 people, potentially, plus a substantial supporting resource from OLC and DSO. Because of the size. It's potentially the largest piece of legislation that's ever gone through the Assembly. So it's a substantial piece. So in terms of looking forward, obviously we can't determine or commit what a future executive or minister, where their priorities might be, but we think that there's an awful lot of groundwork that is useful to be done now in terms of the data gathering we're doing to create an evidence base from which we can begin to determine if a decision is taken, where the priorities might lie in terms of the bill, and work we're doing, not work we want to do in terms of trying to make the best use of the framework we have now to maximise that is the priorities at the moment. That will also help inform potentially where we could go in the future, but it does come down to a future ministerial and executive decision.
Well, I have to say I don't see how drafting legislation, given the scale of the work. So I don't know. Are you saying that it's your view that it would take an entire mandate to both draft and pass legislation?
Yep.
So therefore, would it not make sense to make a start without tying a future minister or minister's hands? I mean, a draft would be a draft. They could then tweak it. Yeah. Do you believe there should be more people working, given the scale that you're outlining to us? There should be more people working on it right now.
If there was to be a bill and a review of the existing law in the way that's required, you would need a much larger team. We would need a bigger resource, and that's a wider resource decision for the department. It's a case of resources.
I'm going to go to members. So Melissa, then I have Kelly, Morris and Sean.
Well, it's just for the Liv Reese. It's nice meeting with you again. We were in the committee just earlier on this week, the all-party group on gambling. And I can understand the concern just that the chair has expressed that there appears not to be any work carried out now in preparation, we'll say even for bringing forward sort of gambling legislation as such. But that which does exist, is there any is there any attention given to enforcement in particular? And I'm thinking here in terms of, we'll say, both bookie shops, pubs, gaming machines and the likes of that, and particularly for young people.
And the department is responsible for setting that regulatory framework, and that framework does exist under that 1985 order. Enforcement is a matter for the police. So any issues that the department becomes aware of, we do pass them on to the PSNI.
Well, with evidence that you have to date, are you aware of maybe where people have been prosecuted as a result of?
We'd be aware certainly where there are things like licenses have been revoked. That would be normally done if there's been a breach of conditions by the courts or whatever. Also, much of that enforcement responsibility and that day-to-day regulation lies out with the department. It's with the police and the courts under the 1985 order. We do recognise, though, that there is a wider concern about the overall level of protection under the law, particularly around online and the enforcement. We get some protection from the 2014 Act in terms of online, but the question is the sufficiency of that and enforcement where there's breaches. And therefore that's one of the reasons why, as Carol alluded to, we're engaging with the likes of the Advertising Standards Authority and DCMS and working in support of colleagues in health and education.
And just finally on that, Chair, when it comes to sort of the issuing of licence and so on, whose responsibility is that? The reason why I ask that question is that if it is someone else's responsibility, why should they wait on the police just to react to a situation in terms of enforcement rather than them themselves carrying out the types of checks that would be required, such as whenever it comes to the sale of alcohol and so on at the present time? You have people maybe that will take that responsibility on.
I can only really tell you how, if you're talking about the 85 order, how the legislation works here. Under the 85 order, the primary responsibility for licences, certificates, permits for the various things you see lies with the courts and the councils. The police do have powers of entry and inspection into premises, and under the 85 order, most licences are renewable annually, and when you're going for renewal of a licence, there's a process set out in the legislation whereby there must be a notice to the police, subdivisional level, a notice to the local council, and a number of areas like that. And that is probably the main areas of checking. But the primary responsibility in terms of enforcement will be the police, and the regulation is primarily courts and councils, and that's just the way the law stands at the moment.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Carol and Kieran. Having been on the committee in the last time, looking at the gambling legislation, I can absolutely appreciate how detailed and busy the type of work that you were talking about takes, and we only touched the surface the last time. I'm just wondering, you'd said, did I pick it up correctly that the information, the guidance, is that already out, or you're still working on that? Because I thought in 22 we'd sort of agreed the context of that, and the department was quite far on in that.
What guidance is it you're referring to, Kelly?
It's the guidance to the shop fronts and to the tic-tac people. Is that guidance out with them?
Are you thinking maybe of the code of practice that we were talking about? Yes, we're consulting. So
Okay.
we'll be consulting them. So that is out for consultation at the moment. The way it worked, Kelly, was that in order to be able to issue a code of practice, a gambling code of practice, we had to bring in a commencement order before we can do that. So that commencement order was brought in October last year, came into operation. So now we have an initial code which we're consulting on at the moment, and that was shared with the committee, I think, back in August, I believe.
Yeah, that closes on 24th of December.
Closes,
is that correct?
yeah.
Okay. Okay, no, thank you for that. The other thing I just wanted to check was I've had local complaints and it's to do with planning permission, and I'm not sure if this has come up with yourselves or it's being considered. Obviously, when anybody's putting in planning permission, they have to do neighbourhood notification. And one of the matters that's come up for one of the shop fronts is that neighbour notification in that instance is other shops and not residents. And the wider area of a town was just wondering if there's something that needs to be different about neighbourhood notification in that the planning is only notified within a certain distance by law, but in actual fact, when it comes to a gambling premises, it has an implication more for people rather than businesses neighbouring them. Is there any work being considered to require, especially under planning legislation where there's a new premises being set up, that the planning may require them to do wider neighbourhood notifications?
I think the department doesn't have responsibility for planning, and that might be the difficulty there. But Kieran, am I right in saying then the legislation does specify that if you're applying for a licence at the point of application?
Getting a bit
You might need to get the
Articles
details
11,
here.
12 and 62, there's a demand test. So
Okay.
before a licence is granted, there's normally a process where the court has to carry out a demand test in the area to see is there sufficient demand for a premises. Also, they have to look at the location of a premises in terms of its closeness to schools, places of worship, places where young people might gather. So there is that element. And obviously, in terms of concerns, if there was a premises going up that neighbours were concerned about, there is a process where you can raise objections. Any person can raise objections to the grant or renewal of a licence. I think the issue there is that while we can't comment on planning, one of the issues that we're trying to look at is how can we ensure there's greater awareness of the kind of facilities, if you like, legal facilities and processes that are out there. But beyond that, I don't know if that's helpful, Kelly, but that's the kind of thing that's available.
I think it just sort of ties in with concerns that people had, the siloing, so planning, while we have the opportunity through the gambling regulations, for people to be made aware, it doesn't actually replicate out for planning. My final one, this is my final one, online gambling. Oh my goodness, the amount of complaints that we receive through about online gambling and advertising of even local businesses doing gambling. Obviously, it's online. And we knew in the last mandate that this wasn't something that would be covered at all within the gambling legislation we were taking forward. And you mentioned that there are discussions ongoing with Westminster, the equivalent department of Westminster. Have you any good news for us on that online gambling front, on anything that they're proposing to do to hopefully prevent, especially underage people, with opportunities to gamble online?
You've had some experience on the underage, haven't you?
Yeah, well, the underage gambling online, our current figures for online gambling, the big ticket items for underage gambling at the moment are about 13%, 11 to 16-year-olds. This is a survey we've done with NISRA, use gaming machines. The next big ticket item would be the National Lottery, buying National Lottery scratch cards. That's about 7%, and the same for playing cards with family and friends. So those, in terms of at the moment gambling, those seem to be the three big ticket items for 11 to 16-year-olds. Now we're repeating that survey, hoping to repeat that survey next year, because last 2022 that was done. We'll do it every 3 years with NISRA, so we can begin to see what the pattern is in terms of that.
Okay, thank you. And I just ask members to be as succinct as possible. Go ahead, Morris.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I will be brief, but just a few queries, and that one is around cross-border gambling. Operators serving Northern Ireland from outside Northern Ireland, what is planned to bring them into line with whatever legislation you eventually put across, and what what work can you do to limit the stakes and deposits and time spent on platforms of people who we don't know what age group they are? They're online gambling, they're using their mobile phones, their computers, etc. So, what limits do you plan to have on stakes, deposits, and time spent, just to make it more safer and more transparent over online gambling? And do you plan to collect data to inform yourselves going forward? I think that'll do me in the meantime, Chair.
Thank you. As brief as you can, please.
Okay, right. There's a few things there. In terms of online gambling, we would mainly rely there on the Gambling Licensing and Advertising Act, whereby the licensed operators must follow the conditions that are set out in the license they get from the Gambling Commission, and that would include the online stakes and all those things as well. Sorry, what was the other part? What data? Cross-border and what data? Yeah, we're just starting engagement now with the DOJ in the South around. At the past little while, the discussion mainly with our colleagues in the South has been around the progress of the new legislation. So we're now at now that's through. We're now trying to work alongside them, and we're having engagement with them, and the GRAI. And one of the purposes that we have in terms of the gaming stakes and so on is that we could align them more closely with what they are in other jurisdictions and have that consistency of approach. And just finally, I'll just say, yes, our major survey we're doing at the moment will cover the kind of data gathering you talked about. Sorry, that was a bit long.
Okay, Sian?
Yeah, and Chair, just to declare that I'm planning a private members bill around society lotteries and charity lotteries and the regulation of them. But I'm surprised, Kieran, whenever you said that 13% use gaming machines. So I'll assume that there'll be a bit of a change when it comes to gaming apps and things like that, because I mean the prevalence now of those apps that are promoting payouts via PayPal have dramatically increased. So I would assume that 11 to 16 cohort would have an increase there. Would you be expecting that?
We don't know. It's very difficult to predict. When we say gaming machines, it's about 13% 11 to 16-year-olds. But we have to remember that by law, low-stakes gaming machines, 11 to 16-year-olds, are legal for 11 to 16-year-olds to use. They can't use the high-stakes ones. Actual online gambling with real-world money by 11 to 16-year-olds is sitting at about 2% at the moment. Again, we want to look at this again to see what the pattern is. But I would say at the moment, the only thing we could put our hands on our heart and say is definitely illegal underage gambling on a significant scale would be the purchase of the National Lottery stuff and the scratch cards and things like that in the shops, which is illegal.
And the apps brings you back to the online sphere as well, which, as Kelly had said previously, it is a grey area. The protections that we do know that we have some protections, but anecdotally we're being told that they aren't actually being seen by the Gambling Commission whenever people do make complaints, and that's where we're trying to do the work now with them to try and identify what exactly, have this very clear, what exactly are those protections, and to try and build with them what can be done to strengthen what is there at the minute, and that will bring in enforcement as well.
Is that then the work that you mentioned with the DCMS? That was more on the gambling levy you'd mentioned, but on terms of that white paper on digital gambling, is that work ongoing with the three departments and DCMS?
Yes, we would, and with the Advertising Standards Authority as well.
And say the Gambling Regulatory Authority of Ireland, are up and running now and have requested a meeting, which we've been looking for as well for a while. So it's trying to bring in all of the different jurisdictions and try and make what we have work.
We do get some indirect benefits from the Licensing and Advertising Act, but that's a lot more preventative I think, a lot of the time than, and the question comes up if, Kelly mentioned these kind of other traders, if there's a breach and how things are enforced, that's where I think a lot of the public concern is, and trying to clarify that out.
Okay, thank you. So we have Brian, Ciara and Daniel, please, briefly as possible.
Yep, Chair. 3 questions, I'll try to keep them quick. In the Code of Practice, it states here that it was an action of the 1985 order, that there should be one. This is called an initial code. So since 1985, has no Code of Practice been issued? It's taken this long, it's taken 40 years nearly.
Code of Practice was brought in under amending legislation in 2022. So this was a power that was created under the previous reforms. So it's in addition to the 1985 order.
Is there an existing Code of Practice?
That's what we're consulting on. This is the first ever.
Right. So
The
even though it was an action in 1985,
No, it
No.
wasn't. It
The
didn't
power,
exist.
the power was included in 2022, but it's added then as an article specifically under the 1985
A new
order. So it
article?
becomes
New
It's a
legislation.
new article. Yeah.
okay, from 2022.
From 2022.
Yeah.
Okay, I get that. And the other 2 questions, they're related. Paragraph 5, the GB Gambling Commission's jurisdiction likewise extends to Northern Ireland in respect to the Section 5 offence of remote gambling advertising. So is that the only matter in which the Gambling Commission jurisdiction extends to Northern Ireland? And do we have what's the equivalent body for Northern Ireland? Is there one?
No, there isn't. And this is one of the other issues. We have no, I think people talk about a regulator, a local gambling regulator. It's a specialised kind of body. That doesn't exist here. So you're really depending at the moment on general police, courts, councils, that type of thing.
Right, which doesn't have
And
the
that's one of
specialism.
the issues for a future review.
Right. So it's only the online stuff that Gambling Commission can act regarding?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's only yes.
Okay.
But
And
I don't want to go how far they
No,
will
I
act or
appreciate
not,
it.
because
No,
there's issues there.
that's one of the discussions that we're trying to have with them, to try and identify very clearly where their remit begins and ends.
Or where we can get a
And-
coordinated approach.
If we can get that coordinated approach, then the idea then is once we have that data and that agreement and that understanding, that information can then we can then move into a position of sharing that information with the public, so that the public are completely aware. And that's where we're working with the education department as well, in terms of them identifying the approach that they need to take at a very young age with children and young people, in terms of what power do they have and what options do they have whenever they see the like of the apps that Shan refers to,
right.
and basically to show them the dangers that are involved there.
Okay. So you're exploring if their powers can be extended more so to Northern Ireland?
I don't think they could be extended any more than what is set out in the 2014 Act. The issue is that what the department has been, what officials are being advised of, is that if anybody from Northern Ireland makes a complaint to the Gambling Commission, it isn't necessarily being progressed, and that's what we're trying to, because it's anecdotal. We don't have any evidence on that.
Right.
What we're trying to do is make get the maximum benefit out of what we have at the moment, and that's going to be our focus, a lot of our focus at the moment.
Okay. Last point, Chair, a bit similar to that. You have there what you're currently doing, liaison with DCMS on aspects of the GB white paper on gambling reform affecting Northern Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
So likewise, there's a paper at Westminster going through.
Published last year, and which they're now bringing forward. Published in 2023, April 2023, white paper on gambling reform.
So does that sentence mean you're monitoring if some of it will apply to Northern Ireland, or are you just monitoring for things which would be part of a potential future bill here?
We're wanting to see how the reforms what changes will affect us, mainly particularly in the advertising area. We want to know obviously what they're doing and whether there is more that can be done in terms of us getting any benefits from any reforms.
It's also important to learn from the other jurisdictions as well, and GB and ROI have made changes in the last number of years, so especially on the online area. The online area, I don't think for any jurisdiction has been easy to enforce. They might have the powers there, but if we can learn from them in their early days, that will help us moving forward.
Just final sentence, Chair. In terms of gambling venues in Northern Ireland, you think it's very unlikely that that white paper, a new bill in GB at Westminster, will apply in Northern Ireland?
If it's venues here, like
Yes.
physical venues, that won't apply here. We have our own legislation for physical venues.
Yeah, it's just we'll be left further behind then.
Yep.
Okay.
Brian had asked me first question on the DCMS and that liaison, obviously regarding the GB white paper. Just secondly, specifically in regard to the statutory levy, and I know at the time at our previous committee, we're very keen, obviously, if there's to be any levy, how that would support those organisations that do vital work, because it is a major issue and it is quite critical piece of work that you are doing, but in moving forward as well. So I do have a bit concern that I know it will be the biggest, because I know at our last committee we realised it is a massive piece of work. I am concerned that there is just a small team at this moment of time trying to move forward so far in this work, and given what we would hope to do moving forward. But at this moment in time, I would like a wee bit more information on where it's at regarding the levy and what conversations is happening. And
The power for the levy is included in the 2022 Act, so that can be progressed. The situation with the levy then, there's a couple of things there. DOF do need to approve any levy, and for that we're back to the evidence, unfortunately, and we're back to trying to find, and that's where we're working very hard to gather that evidence. A lot of that is being published on the department website as well. So once there would be evidence there, the matter then becomes of how that's actually issued, how that levy is distributed, and that's where the conversations with Department of Health are ongoing. That's to deal with gambling, harm and education. That's where those two departments come in and are leading on those particular areas. So there would need to be a clear route in terms of that levy being shared. The proceeds from that levy actually being handed out. Discussions obviously with DCMS had referred to are also including the GB levy. Kieran, you might know a little bit more about that in terms of what the white paper actually said. We're trying to get clarity on that.
The white paper is proposing a mandatory levy across GB. So part of the discussion there is that we're engaging with DCMS around is that this region should benefit in some way too, because on the basis that a lot of for example, the online operators operate here, get money from people here. So it's to see how we can get access to some of the GB monies is one of the issues that we're in discussion with DCMS about. And again, we're talking money that they're proposing to direct towards the NHS. So this is again where the three ministers, our own health and education, have written to DCMS about this, so we're getting discussions underway on that.
It would be very important to have those routes agreed in advance of who was to manage that money, because I think the worst position we could be in is to be told there's money available for you and it can't be spent. So that work, as I say, with it wouldn't be for our department to be able to issue that, so that work with Department of Health is ongoing.
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, Tanya.
Thank you, Carol. Just a number of questions, really. A lot of the groundwork was done in relation to this legislation in the last mandate. I'm just wondering why we're only consulting on it in December 24.
Are you referring to the Code of Practice?
Yeah.
Well, the Code of Practice, the last mandate, it created a power to issue a Code of Practice. So then there's commencing legislation needed to be brought in before we could actually do that, and then there is a consultation. But I think our feeling also was when we commenced the power in 2023 that our preference would be to have some form of wider ministerial buy-in to whatever would be proposed in the code going forward.
So in the absence of the institutions, it just halted?
Work was carried out on drawing up a code of practice. Work was carried out in terms of developing the commencing legislation.
So what's been happening over the last 2 years then?
What's been happening over the last 2 years is we've been having to carry out. We've done the commencing legislation. We have put together arrangements for surveys and data gathering with courts, councils, and our large-scale gambling prevalence survey. That's top of my head. That's the kind of work that's going on.
To be honest, Kieran, it doesn't sound like a lot has happened in the last 2 years. I just don't understand the snail pace of which this is moving. We're never going to catch up if we keep continuing in this trajectory, particularly with the fast-evolving world of gambling now. We're not even touching on the ages of the online stuff, and we're catching up. It's not moving quick enough. We've known that we've needed a code of practice since 1985, and we're only catching up.
No, we didn't have a code of practice.
No, we've known that we've needed one from back then. It's very clear from the journey we're on that this has long been an issue, but yet we're only moving it forward now. I just struggle to understand how we're ever going to get to where we need to be with this, and I'm worried about how the snail pace of the department is going to deliver on it. I'm just wondering, see, whenever the consultation closes on the 24th of December, what's the proposed timeframes for taking it forward after that particular date?
That really depends on, can't really give an answer to that when we don't know what the responses are going to be, unfortunately.
Yeah, but you're estimating that overall as well, any legislative timeframe is going to take a full mandate with 15 people.
From policy development right the way through to receiving oral assent, yes.
But if other jurisdictions have got this done, why are we taking so long to move forward?
Other jurisdictions, I think, have been ahead probably from the beginning.
Yeah, they have.
So we're starting at a point where, say, online is a grey area. The advice from OLC and the advice from DSO is to be very careful with it.
I don't mean
so
to be.
It's not a case of trying to add little bits into the 1985 order. The advice is that it requires a complete rewrite.
Yeah, I've no doubt about it, but the pace of which the department are going at this, it will be out of date by the time you implement what you are planning to implement. It's far too slow, to be honest with you. I've heard nothing today that gives me any confidence we're going to deliver this anytime soon, to be honest. Or that it's going to be relevant when we get to that point. I'm sorry, Chair.
Okay. I also struggle with the idea that I don't anticipate, to be honest, that an incoming minister wouldn't want to progress this work at pace. So I don't see why that policy work couldn't be done at pace. Given the scale and the range of the issues you've discussed, I actually think it's probably impossible for two officials to do the substantial amount of work that would be needed. Would you agree with me that there should be, given your knowledge of gambling, there should be more resource put to this at this point to prepare us so we can hit the ground running in the next mandate?
There would need to be more, but without a policy position, that's very difficult for us to work on as officials. So in terms of the policy development as well, the data gathering that we're doing is part of policy development. So I understand what Daniel's saying about even at the time in which we get to a position of doing a bill, things will have moved on. During this time, we are looking at what other jurisdictions are doing and we learn from them. And at that point in time, at any bill going through the Assembly, if something else is happening, then that can be brought in at amendment stages as well. The code of practice is quite helpful in that it is a code. It is not set out in legislation, but it does have a bit of teeth there. So any other issues that can't be progressed by legislation but could possibly be considered by a code is open then to be considered, and codes are very reactive for that purpose.
Okay, Andy, you've indicated there later on, so could you?
Thanks, Chair. Can I maybe just bring us back to the enforcement piece? And obviously I understand the Department's responsibility in terms of legislative scope and the framework, but what is the Department's assessment as to the effectiveness of enforcement?
I don't think it's appropriate for the Department to comment on the PSNI's activities. We do engage regularly with the PSNI. And
clearly the Department monitors how effective the legislation is in terms of enforcement.
We certainly gather data on that, and we know that certainly courts and councils are active within their powers, and so that there is regulation out there under the 85 order, and that is carried out. We keep that. We look at that.
And so would the Department's view be that those current enforcement powers under the legislation are effective?
By and large, the framework by and large is for the premises based, I would say.
Yeah, but the question was, is the department's view that they're effective in their current form?
I think as Kieran mentioned earlier on, there are powers for entry and inspection. So the powers are there that in the current framework that meet the current framework's needs.
The question would be really, Andy, whether, and that would be for a review to really consider whether we need further specialised work around gambling, which will cover both, can be comprehensive about both premises based and online.
But through your monitoring of the current powers and your engagement and interaction with the PSNI, have there been any concerns at any stage raised to the effectiveness of the powers that they currently have under the legislation?
There's concerns about the online and the
powers that they currently have under 85, the land-based?
No, they've not raised concerns about powers that they have under the 85 order. Any concerns they have are more future.
Okay, and then if we just pivot to, in your briefing paper, you had highlighted obviously supporting the Department of Health and Education as to their respectively consider the future public health and educational approach to gambling. Are you maybe to expand on that a wee bit further? I know you've touched on that in terms of other members' contributions, but particularly the educational and the prevention piece. Are you aware of what's happening there in that arena so far?
Well, the cross-departmental group has met a number of occasions. I've come in sort of towards the tail end of that. I'm not too sure what specific discussions, Kieran, there has been on their activities. More what, am I right in saying it's more what we've been doing that can assist them? I'm not. I couldn't answer for them in terms of what they are physically doing.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Yeah, but while you've mentioned that a number of things are for other areas, you have the regulatory role.
Yes.
We have the regulatory
role.
Yes.
So you have the overarching need to ensure that all of those other involved agencies are effective. So I think that's a key point to make here.
No, just one quick one, just to note. In your report, you had mentioned that the Minister had completed a review of the current regulatory position. I would assume that's to set a baseline as to then what is required moving forward. And as you mentioned, to move forward in a phase 2 of the bill, gambling legislation, of its magnitude and of its scale. So with regards to the review, is there any forward planning regarding timescales of what you are currently doing? And I understand you are doing a lot of policy development and a lot of extensive consultation. But have you a timescale, a plan of this is the baseline where we're at, this is what we want to achieve by the end of the mandate? And then potentially, because I am concerned and I'm conscious you have a small team, and it is a really, really important issue, and it's something maybe I would like to see what else needs to be done post the end of this mandate. You know, what's your time frame, what else needs to be done, so we can understand clearly the ongoing work that's required. And maybe, as you mentioned, you mentioned some figures regarding complement of staff and team. I think it would be important for us to know, and moving forward, if we did have this team, what else could we be doing even within this mandate? So I don't know if that's possible to ask.
It's difficult in terms of a time frame. I mean, the type of data gathering that we're doing is ongoing, and as I mentioned earlier on, it's that looking at other jurisdictions. It's the work that we're doing with the South, with the Republic of Ireland and the GRAI and DCMS in terms of trying to find the information that we need to be able to have a full evidence base to put to a minister coming in on day one to say that this is the issue that's in Northern Ireland, this is the information that we have, and this is the direction potentially you want to go of travel. And if that's the case, then that will require primary legislation, that will require a build team of between 20 to 30 people. It is likely going to be a bill in the region of 300 plus clauses. That's why we need a build team of that size. We need OLC on board and potentially a specific DSO as well.
And the current review of the current regulatory position we're in, what was the review about?
That was Minister's position in terms of where we stood at the time, and the plan from the previous mandate about having a second bill in this mandate, and a consideration that actually in this mandate there isn't enough there isn't enough time.
What is needed to bring? What is needed?
That's what
to
I'm
bring
asking.
forward? Yeah, what is needed?
Can we receive a copy of that so we can understand that context as well? Is that possible?
Copy of
The actual review. So there was a review undertaken. This is a regulatory position. This is the mandate that we have now. This is what we can do and achieve. And it'd be interesting to get a timeline of the current regulations that you're progressing through. And then subsequently, there was a reason why we're not starting at all. And you have mentioned that.
What information went into that review?
Yes, it would be. It'd be useful and would be educational for us to more fully understand that, if possible. If that could be receive a copy of it.
Okay, thank you. And in relation, and you've mentioned there yourselves, we are looking at 2 SL1s, and with members' agreement, maybe we should look at bringing those forward and dealing with those now, given they're related to gambling. So, in light of the fact that there's none of the other safeguards that you'd want in place, what is it talks about the proposed rule increase the permitted maximum amounts in gaming other than by machine for prizes on bingo club premises, as well as increasing the maximum permitted stakes. What are those levels? What are they being increased to?
I thought that was included in the SL1s, was it not?
Not included in the SL1s.
Sorry,
Yeah.
we don't have it.
It's SL1 gaming variation of monetary limits. So the second SL1 deals makes a limit of 400. The first one doesn't mention any values. I'll give you a minute there to.
I thought that had said that. You have listed there, don't you?
I had said that.
It's basically bringing them into line with what is in GB.
Yes.
Apologies, I did think that was included in that. So your maximum stake then.
Is it not in the letter there?
Right. So it brings them into line. So would you have a concern that without having the more wider arching legislation in place, we are increasing incentives for gambling in terms of around the prizes? In terms of your work, is that something that we should be doing at this point in time?
It was agreed in the previous mandate, which is why it's being progressed now. There was a situation with the primary legislation in the previous mandate that it wasn't suitable to do it. There was the decision, as mentioned earlier, about the fact that there was agreement that you shouldn't have the same stakes and prizes available to somebody who is in a pub where alcohol is being consumed and in a dedicated gaming premises. So it was realistically, this would have happened last year if it wasn't for the time in the mandate that the team were in at that time. So the primary legislation was changed as part of the bill, and then the agreement at that committee at that time was that this would be progressed at a later time. The drafting of that secondary legislation just takes time, and it didn't get through in that mandate. I think you were really quite close at the end.
Yeah. I think your question really is that from the evidence we have, we don't see that the use of these increases, which align with other jurisdictions, that they will necessarily lead to higher levels of gambling harm. I think that's your concern. We don't see that from the evidence we have. Obviously, it's secondary legislation, so if that did become the case, that could be looked at again.
There's also a link at the same time with the code as well. So
sorry, Chair.
With the code, with the code coming in, the code does talk about the like of age verification checks and things like that. So it will put, and the like of the notices to be placed both inside and outside the types of venues where these limits are being increased. The
assistance to help, the guidance to help people with self-exclusion and so on.
Okay, well listen, could I ask if members are agreed that we move these to item 10 and 11 just to deal with this? Could you stay on a couple of minutes in case there are any other questions in relation to those SL1s?
Yeah.
Just it makes sense when they're both related to your brief. So members, with your permission then, we'll move on to agenda item 10 and we'll come back then to the NICFA briefing. So agenda item 10 is SL1, the gaming variation of monetary limits order 2024. And that's on page 292. So members, the proposed rule increases the permitted maximum amounts in gaming other than by machine for prizes on bingo club premises, as well as increasing the maximum permitted stakes and prizes for gaming by means of a gaming machine in permitted locations. Do members have any comments, or are they content for the department to make the rule? Ciara?
It's more of a question, sorry, because obviously we're going back 21, 22, obviously when this was originally and the evidence was presented at committee, and obviously 2 years on, I'm conscious of, have you done any review of GB and the impact that it's had in relation to the increases there?
Well, in
Since
GB,
then?
actually, the position was that in 2019, a lot of these didn't have limits. So they brought, for example, what they talk about, the fixed odd betting terminals, they brought them into £2.500, and that was at that time was seen as a welcome way of controlling that. So they actually were bringing the limits down and setting maximum limits. So that was the experience there.
Okay. No, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions in relation to that SL1 member?
Yeah, Chair, just to expand on your point in relation to any adverse impact, and you'd mentioned obviously the department could, by secondary legislation, review this. How does the department intend to gather information and review it to foresee any adverse impact?
That mainly that will be through the work we regularly do in terms of our, gambling prevalence surveys. That will be mainly the work we do which is amongst adults, because these will only apply, and I should stress, these will only apply to over 18s machines.
Okay, but the mechanisms that the department have at the moment through those surveys are sufficiently robust enough to identify any adverse impact?
Yes, because we are looking, the surveys will look at prevalence. They also, this particular one will be looking at the behaviours of the regular gambler.
Okay.
And obviously, to be fair, if there was other evidence came our way anecdotally or from our other contacts, then we would look at that again as well.
The work with the cross-departmental working group's important in
and
that too.
And the work with
because
health and education.
They get the information, at ground level, that can be fed up then, and then that can come back to us through those means.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Just
No, sorry, no, yeah,
Sorry,
not
Brian.
I know in the paper there you've compared with the position in GB. You're just to reiterate, are you saying that these changes will bring us into line with the position generally in Great Britain?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And they set different rates for, say, adult gaming centres and bookmakers from, say, pubs and clubs, and things like that. So it brings that more into line there. Brings it into line there.
Pardon me not understanding. When you talk about aggregated winnings, what does that mean as opposed to, let me see, a single? Single winning?
That's the maximum amount. If you win a prize, that's the maximum overall amount you can take in any one game or determination.
On a machine?
It's on a machine, or in the bingo club's premises, it would be a bingo game.
Yes.
Right. Game of bingo, yeah.
Yes,
so your maximum,
calling out.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. So your maximum will go from 120 to £500 in the bingo.
So maximum prize money, right? Maximum permitted aggregate amount is that in a bingo game or is that from a machine?
Yeah. Total of all games. Yeah.
On an evening or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
No, just finally, just for information, the gambling prevalence survey, which will be used to monitor, how often is that run?
Goodness, 20.
It's normally every 6 years.
COVID, there was a delay with COVID, I think.
There was a delay with COVID, but obviously it's not the only thing that we will rely on in terms of, it'll be a big part of our reliance, but that's every 6 years.
So
The reason being because it's done face to face. It's a household survey, so it's quite a big.
The last one there were 1,000 people, and that was pre-COVID. This time round we upped that to 2,000 people, and we were advised that was the first real interview that took place within people's homes. So it's taken slightly longer than we expected, in terms of willingness to allow people in, which you can understand. So that has recently completed, and the expectation is that the data will be ready for that early next year.
Yeah.
Could I suggest, because I think 6 years legislation coming in and then having to wait 6 years for results, and then there's the analysis of the survey, and I understand it's a critical survey. The likes of the omnibus survey, do you utilise the omnibus survey on a regular basis where you can get a snapshot?
We will use
snapshot
some
of
of those as well.
Right.
And we do every 3 years. It's for 11 to 16-year-olds. But there's a balance here because generally we are advised that the more accurate surveys, the best quality information comes from face-to-face, say, rather than doing them online. But that is time-consuming, and cost is a big issue there, which is why it's run. So it's always a balance between quality and
it's just it's critically important to measure the impact and to be alerted quite quickly if there is any unforeseen negative impacts to any regulations or legislation going forward. And you did mention there's other ways, not for now, but maybe you could write to us just to let us know, because if it's every 6 years a prevalence survey, and as we have a massive piece of legislation that's moving forward, with regulations moving forward, to have to wait 6-7 years later to see maybe the impact. So it'd be useful just to know what other mechanisms are available to yourselves as officials to provide an update on the impact of any of the regulations and legislation. So thank you.
Thank you. So then, members, in relation to that, agenda item 10, SL1, the gaming variation of monthly limits order 2024, are members content for the department to proceed to make that rule? Yep, content. Agenda item 11, SL1, the gaming machines and registered clubs, regulations NI 2024, which are page 305. So this proposed rule sets the maximum prize entitlement in respect of any one game played by means of a gaming machine in a registered club at £400. Do members have any comments, or are they content for the department to proceed to make that rule? Yeah, members content. Okay, now, so thank you.
Sure,
yes, Andy, go ahead.
Very quickly, just on Kira's point, I'm sure other members would have their own views, but it would be prudent, I think, to have the information in terms of evaluating and reviewing things before the SRs actually come, just so we're satisfied that the review mechanisms are sufficiently robust enough.
Yeah, and I do agree with the Deputy Chair's point in relation to, while I absolutely welcome the bells and whistles approach of the full review, that's not to say that we shouldn't find very accurate ways of taking the temperature of changes in between times to monitor on an ongoing basis. So I think that's really what we're trying to get at. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. So members content to make the rule then on that basis? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, thank you both for your attendance, and particularly for staying on, helping us with those SL1s. Really appreciate that. So thank you. I can let you go. Members, I'm saying we're moving now actually to welfare supplementary item, but I'm going to take a quick comfort break there. We are significantly behind time, so I'm going to ask members to keep it really short. Maximum 5 minutes. Ready and rolling again, please. Thank you, Clerk.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound.
I change so much in only 1 month, but I'm not the end up charging you. I could change 1,000, let's say, into euro in the month of November. See if I attempted to then go in and change some more onto euro, then this is
Okay, members, we're in live session. Thank you very much. Moving on, member to agenda item 8, which is the departmental briefing on welfare supplementary payment and on carers allowance. So there are no papers for the agenda item. This is an oral briefing, and I welcome the following officials. So we have Leonora McLaughlin, who's Director of Pensions, Disability and Carers, and Rory O'Connell, who's Assistant Director of Pensions, Disability and Carers. So thank you. Leonora, do you want to make any opening statement then before we go to members?
Yes. Firstly, good afternoon and thank you for the opportunity to come and give you some briefing today on the welfare supplementary payment waiver and carers allowance overpayments. If the committee's content, I'll begin with a brief update on where we are with both of these areas, picking up on some information you'll have already received through correspondence, but providing an opportunity for any questions or points of clarification that you might have. I'm proposing that we'll begin with the welfare supplementary payment overpayments and the action that the department has taken to address stakeholder concerns about the lack of a waiver facility, particularly for social sector size criteria and benefit cap related payments, because these the overpayments of these are generally recouped from a landlord, who in turn recoups it from the individual through their rent account. As a starting point, it might be helpful to explain that unlike legacy benefits, the department has powers under the Welfare Reform Northern Ireland Order 2015 and the Welfare Supplementary Payment Amendment Regulations in Northern Ireland for 2017 to recover overpayments caused by the department's actions. That's what we refer to as official error. So kind of batch of new benefits and changes that come in under welfare reforms, we recover official error. We have powers to do that. While the legislation permits the department discretion to decide whether to pursue recovery or not, in practice this has not been used, and the department seeks recovery of welfare supplementary payment overpayments, including those caused by official error. And to be fair, that has been an important feature of the welfare supplementary payment scheme, because unlike other benefits where recovered monies go back to Treasury, any recovered monies for welfare supplementary payments are ploughed back into the mitigation schemes. Nevertheless, the department has acknowledged that welfare supplementary payment recipients have not had the same access to support to manage their debt as other customers with other social security benefit overpayments. And we've responded to stakeholder feedback, and a new new waiver facility has been introduced for welfare supplementary payments from the 30th of September. As previously advised, it's intended that the welfare supplementary payment waiver works in the same way as the department's existing waiver process, and that's kind of to be instigated in exceptional circumstances, primarily on health grounds, but also where recovery will cause significant and lasting financial hardship, and the waiver requests must be accompanied by supporting evidence. A waiver will be applicable for WSP overpayments identified from the point that the new facility went live, so from the 30th of September. Requests must be made in writing, and the recipient has a 3-month window to make a request for waiver from the point they receive a notification from the department that they have an overpayment. And we've had some calls up to date inquiring for more information through to the team, but no waiver requests at the minute, but we're not yet at the end of that first kind of 3-month period. The department has worked with a wide range of stakeholders developing the new processes, and will continue this engagement as new processes bed in. I think we recognise there will be teeths and troubles, and there may be things that we need to refine. More generally, responding to stakeholder feedback that people don't really understand welfare supplementary payments and may not be fully aware that a payment has been made on their behalf, the department has committed to revisiting customer messaging and notifications to try and improve this awareness, and it has been suggested that could include something like an annual reminder to customers that there's a payment been made on their behalf. If the committee is content, that's all I propose to say on welfare supplementary payments, and I'm happy to move on to carers allowance. Okay. Yep. Now, conversely, I suppose, to start with for carers allowance, it may be helpful to clarify that carers allowance overpayments caused by official error are not recovered, so it's a legacy benefit, an older benefit. And with all social security benefits, there is an onus on the customer to update us to any change in circumstances that would impact their payment. And overpayments typically occur when this is not done or not done promptly. the committee will be aware that there's been significant UK-wide media and political and public attention on the issue of carers allowance overpayments over the last 6 months. This relates specifically to overpayments caused by breaches in the earnings threshold, where this has happened and not been identified, and the overpayment has increased over time. The Department recognises the contribution that carers make to individuals and our local communities in Northern Ireland, and also recognises the financial burden that an overpayment can cause, particularly if it's not identified and let to run on. In addition to the measures in place to assist the Department to identify overpayments at the earliest opportunity, the Department is currently working with the Department for Work and Pensions on implementing the verification of earnings and payments system. And that uses real-time information and will pick up where there has been a breach of the threshold in relation to carers allowance. The current expectation is that that system will be introduced in carers allowance in Northern Ireland. Really, we're expecting to see it implemented before Christmas on a phased basis, that will be sort of early access to work through kind of the operational processes, but also to put in alerts for new claims, and then we'll work on with the Department for Work and Pensions to facilitate the upload of the existing caseload of carers allowance. Now, while the VEP system is going to be, it's a tool that's used, it will be helpful. I think the DWP would hold their hands up that there are limitations to the system at the minute, and we will work closely with DWP as they work to enhance that system to make it more effective. So recognising that sort of this issue of reporting changes promptly is kind of key to overpayments. The Department has initiated a programme of local stakeholder engagement to increase awareness about the importance of understanding overpayments in the first instance, but the importance of reporting changes quickly to the Department. As previously advised, there was 2 virtual information sessions held with stakeholders in July, and there are plans to do another in December. The Department has recently responded to the committee about the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions announcement about an independent review for carers allowance overpayments, and confirming that it's not intended to commission a similar review in Northern Ireland. And that's on the basis that we broadly have parity with DWP. We have the same legislation, we have the same operational process with the exception of the verification of earnings and pensions. So we're expecting that the recommendations will be applicable in Northern Ireland. We'll obviously consider the recommendations fully with a view to improving the support that we give to our local carers. We'll also engage specifically on this matter with stakeholders to pick up if there's anything else that we will want to identify. Moving on briefly then to recent budget announcement about changes to the carers allowance earnings threshold. The Department welcomes this development and will be engaging with DWP as we go forward as they make system changes and on changes to the policy. Finally, the Department remains committed to assisting carers allowance recipients who are repaying an overpayment debt and experiencing financial difficulties. And you'll be aware that the Department's debt management team provides support to agree affordable and sustainable repayment plans. We have no monetary target in terms of recovery, but the metric for us is about getting active recovery, and so we will pitch. The repayment levels will be agreed on a tailored basis to suit individuals at a sustainable level. Happy to take any questions. Sorry, that was a bit of a whistle stop.
But well, listen, and I do appreciate the whistle stop and some interesting information. I want to say, in the first instance, I do welcome the fact that new waiver facility is in place, and I would like to keep an eye on how that works out as it goes on. Yes. Let me check, does that new waiver facility approach carry across into the carers overpayments issue? Because I know it was in relation to WSP.
Carers allowance customers at the minute, or people in receipt of carers allowance, can use the existing waiver facility within the department. So debt management have an existing facility there. The waiver is new just for welfare supplementary payments because it was never, it wasn't covered as part of the legislation at the point that the mitigation measures were brought in.
Okay. Okay, I would want to, I put on the record just around the whole carers allowance and the overpayments. I actually think I would have preferred had that review taken a look at the entire benefit of carers allowance. The thresholds and the way those apply and they are really unsatisfactory and actually contribute, in my view, to putting carers into poverty. And I think that's something that committee have referenced several times. I do want to check, you'd said that recovered monies are paid back into the mitigation scheme. That mitigation scheme includes the benefit cap.
Yes.
Yeah. So has that, and the committee are very concerned around that benefit cap and the fact that we have seen no activity in relation to that coming forward to ensure that there's no cliff edge. So can you tell us what work has been done in relation to the department or in relation to bringing it to the executive on the benefit cap mitigation to get that renewed?
Well, as a sort of an operational director, the policy is a bit outside my remit, but you'll be aware that the extension to the mitigations is something that is ongoing at the minute, and Minister will be bringing that to the executive in advance of kind of the end of March 25, when some of the mitigations will end. And sorry, from an operational perspective, just to give you that assurance that we are working on at the minute, we are responsible for the system, so we are doing all of the preparatory work. So from an operational perspective, at the point that the legislation or there is a way forward, we will be good to go with that.
So given that there will be a time lag, there will be consultation needed, when do you propose to come forward to committee with any of the legislative or regulatory steps that will be needed to put that into place?
I'm sorry, that's kind of outside my remit. It would be policy colleagues within the department. I certainly can take that back and get somebody to respond to you.
Yeah, because we're really concerned that there is a number of stages and pieces of work that need to be taken to ensure, and we would like to see that assurance given to people in the first instance who are at significant risk of being plunged into deep poverty should this not be addressed with urgency. So I want to put that.
I think there's a number of steps we have fed back from an operational perspective. Some of the findings around kind of the operational delivery side of it. So all of that work has gone on. You'll be aware there was a stakeholder engagement session that kind of took stakeholder reviews on the existing package of mitigations. So all of that, I think, contributes to an overall report which will be taken forward.
Can you send us through that information as to what work is currently happening and has been done to date? Can you send us that through as a matter of urgency, please?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to Sian, Melissa, Brian and Ciara.
You covered quite a bit of it, Chair, in terms of, I suppose, around the carers allowance. There was a disappointment that review didn't actually cover the, I suppose, and I know that it's outside of your operational remit, but in terms of a policy.
Sorry, not to interrupt, but just maybe to clarify that we did work with the Department for Work and Pensions. We thought while, and it sort of makes sense, it's an operational review, it's not the policy. And so the point that was made was that as a devolved area, it wouldn't be appropriate for kind of a review to pick up in Northern Ireland, but we thought we might be able to ensure that stakeholder views at least were incorporated in some shape or form, but unfortunately we weren't able to agree that. Now what they have said is that I'm thinking of CARES UK, CARES NI are sort of inextricably linked. What they have said is if there's feedback in Northern Ireland, they'll not sort of disaggregate it, but they will not be seeking input from stakeholders. So and I think that comes down to, on a policy perspective, DWP officials will generally work with us, but I think because this was operational, it wasn't appropriate in the circumstances.
It's just frustrating, I suppose, because we know the levels of poverty among carers in Northern Ireland is so high, and I agree with you, Chair. I think that the nature of that benefit is exacerbating the problem in terms of it being a cliff edge rather than a tapered benefit.
And I think we will work with DWP certainly on changes coming out of this independent review, which is very operationally focused on the overpayments, but the government obviously will be looking at carers allowance. They've committed it. I think there has been a demand for some sort of taper or some sort of way of better managing sort of earned income for carers allowance. So we'll keep very close. It'll be policy colleagues who have the lead for that for Northern Ireland, but we work very closely with policy colleagues in DWP and operational colleagues as well on that. So if there are changes, obviously that they apply in Northern Ireland.
Okay, I'll not take up much more time, Chair. Around the welfare supplementary, the mitigations. Is there a time frame that you have been aware of that's your cut off? That if the legislation isn't in place by this point, if things aren't put through by a certain time, that there will then end up being a gap for people between the 31st of March and onwards? Is there a cut off basically for your department?
I suppose we are continuing to work. So from a system perspective, we are doing the development now that will allow us to continue to extend the payments essentially. So I don't think.
Can I add, Leo, just as well, that previously we have run out of legislative cover in these schemes before, because it had always been kind of at the 11th hour the decision if they can be extended or not. The payments have carried on all occasions. They've been covered in the relevant budget bill for each year. So we don't anticipate that if there's a legislative slowdown or hold up, that would stop the payments being made.
Okay.
Yeah, that has happened before, so it would be a similar scenario this time round.
But if the legislation isn't in place to push it through past the 31st of March, would there be?
What happened was the line was included to cover the cost basically of making the payment, and they were made as administrative payments then and not under legislation, but it would allow us to carry on paying them to people.
Okay.
But I have to say the focus at the minute is on getting kind of all of that squared off and the legislation in place to support statutory payments.
I'm glad that it is a focus. I mean, it's one of the number one issues that people are raising with me.
Thank you. So I'm going to go now to Malaysia, then with Brian, Ciara and Kelly. I do see your hand on screen as well. So Lanneray, Malaysia, Lily Castain.
Thank you, Rolf. Rory, I was Lenora. Just a very quick question. In your presentation, Lenora, you had mentioned just in terms of recovery and so on that you didn't chase it up in situations where there was significant hardship.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's very subjective opinion, really. What is it to get significant hardship, and who is it that decides on that?
The waiver, I'll take it in two parts if you don't mind. The welfare supplementary waiver decisions will be made by an experienced team in debt management. So we looked at whether it should sit as a separate function, and then we thought for consistency and to benefit from that expertise, obviously there has been a waiver facility in place for quite some time for other social security benefits, and so it is those decision makers will be making the decision for welfare supplementary payments as well. In relation to not following up and kind of the subjectivity, there is guidance in place, but we do ask that kind of a waiver that's been requested, for example, on health grounds, is supported by medical evidence. So there would be a view from a GP or a specialist that that recovery is, either exacerbating or causing that person, kind of ill health.
But is the case that the responsibility is with the individual to produce evidence in terms of maybe how it's impacting on their mental health?
Yes, or financial impact.
Yeah, and the financial impact then as well?
No, that a waiver can be considered where it isn't on health grounds, but there is, kind of going to be lasting financial hardship as a result of an overpayment. And I suppose, like everything, it's a decision-making function, so it is discretionary. And so there is always, there's guidance, and there's we will benefit from experience in this case, but it's always down to kind of how the individual decision-maker interprets, kind of whether the criteria is met.
Just finally on that, and is that guidance given to, we'll say, the recipient in the first instance? Very often, as we would like it used to be said before, whenever one was dealing with the likes of social services and so on, that they didn't disclose this information to you. Is that guidance given to someone who finds themselves in that situation whereby they want to contest whether or not they are still going to be held responsible for a repayment?
There is information on NI Direct. Does it go into kind of the depth of the guidance? It probably doesn't, but I think it is clear that waivers are supposed to apply in exceptional circumstances. The department does have an obligation under managing public money to try and recover where it's reasonable and cost effective to do that. but that is something we could certainly take away and look and see, do we, particularly because welfare supplementary payments, the waiver facility will be new to that cohort of people. If that's something that, you know, kind of we can sort of reinforce some of our customer facing messaging to make sure that people are aware.
I would appreciate that, because that's exactly the situation I've seen happen at times that where, in particular, very often people who are in that situation don't know how to access, and little of that information is actually given to them in a way that whereby they can actually take it on board and understand it and maybe contest whatever it is that they have to be dealing with.
We have an opportunity, as I said, we have committed to kind of looking at our customer information generally, and we'll do that with stakeholders. So, and that is something that we can pick up and say, look, is there something more that we need to be doing here?
Brian?
Good Chair. In terms of people trying not to go over the limit, the earnings limit, and it actually is a disincentive, you know, for people taking on more hours. And I hear various people saying that they don't want extra hours because they want to stay under the, and I know the threshold's increasing from the budget, and that's welcome. But I don't know if this is the nature of your work. In terms of how that is calculated or when that is uncovered by the system, is it at the end of the financial year when you know someone's tax returns are looked at from their earnings? Or is it done on a week-to-week basis? You know, I mean, because some people are going to be on variable hours. If they went over 1 week, but the next week they were under, or if their wages are somehow, you know, the hours are put into 1 week that they mightn't have worked that particular week, are people meant to declare every individual week, or is it looked at over a longer time scale? And how is it assessed?
There are a number of regimes you can kind of follow depending on the style of and the sort of the period that you get paid on, and there are people who have seasonal fluctuations and the like. And if you were a set person, say that had the same income and then had a few weeks, you were paid weekly for example, a few weeks that were above the limit, you don't really need to tell us exactly if it's not going to be something that carries on. But it was a change that was going to persist in your work pattern, and you think I'm going to be earning at a higher level that maybe takes me nearer over the threshold, that's when you should contact us, and we can then look at your income, and we generally average it based on, depending on how often you're paid. We have rules how we average different incomes, you know, weekly, fortnightly, whatever. And it would really be if you know that your income is changing either permanently or for a sustained period that might put you on average over that. But solitary weeks or bonus payments and work and stuff like that, we would disregard a lot of that things. And even the new verification earnings and pension system, before it sends us alert, it will look at previous pay slips. Another example for someone who earns weekly, if there's a payment that it comes in and notices is over the £151 threshold, it will average the last 8 weeks and say, well, is this an outlier, that kind of thing. And it's only if that averaging is over, it will send us an alert when it's in place. So we do like to consider ways of letting people still have access to the benefit. If someone's a seasonal worker, we can ask them, you know, just every 4 weeks we'll look at your income and pay you in arrears, so you may be in 2 weeks out of 4 and that kind of thing, as opposed to using an average there, which would be disadvantageous to the customer. We try to make sure we can give them 2 weeks at least, that kind of thing. So if I'm trying to think of an example sort of off the top of my head, but that kind of thing, to try and allow people to have some entitlement.
And I think probably it's accurate enough to say if we can manage to keep the income for that customer so that there is a kind of a fair outcome in terms of retaining the carers allowance payment, we'll do that. Allowable expenses is another area that we will look at to kind of, you know, make sure that we're looking at a net figure rather than, you know, kind of.
It's because there's various things, your travel expenses to work and so on.
Anything that directly relates to your job that you need to pay to keep your employment going, we will look at this regarding that.
Okay. I mean, and as others have said, obviously the cliff edge nature of it, that you either get it or you don't, you know, is, but that's probably beyond your remit. But hopefully that'll be part of the governmental review, because as I say, it's a disincentive then to people to take on extra hours if they're going to lose 81.90.
Or need training and education.
Okay, thank you.
Courses. So Ciara, yeah.
Just two, and it's one that was obviously following on from Brian. It's just in relation to the individual carers themselves and how they report it, and make that as easy as possible to do it. So at this moment in time, is there an online system that they can report the changes?
Change it online 365 days a year normally.
Yeah.
Unless
So as soon as they can report a change
Yes.
as often as they want, and you will be able to.
I would advise them to report it online, because the best thing about that is if our office is not open on that day or anything, it's in the system then, and if we were to look and say, well, this has created an overpayment, you would have logged that you contacted us then, and we would very likely deem that non-recoverable because you've put the ball in our court then, and if we took 2 weeks to come back to you, that's not a customer's fault then. So that's why we do like to push people to say that online is very effective for reporting changes. Even if you're just telling us, I think my income is potentially over, can you call me to discuss this, that kind of thing. Log that in the system so that then you've contacted us.
So just moving on from that, in relation to, do you feel that may be an issue? I'm thinking of our current carers and the roles that they're playing, and we would be lost without them. But regarding IT ability, access to computers to do such work, is it an issue, do you think, or do you think it isn't?
It doesn't seem to be, actually, because I think for my areas, Carers Allowance stands out. We are getting, I think, 95-96% of our new claims online, which would sort of suggest we're dealing with a cohort that have access and are, kind of reasonably au fait with using online facilities.
I think claims online, most people doing a claim for it online get support and go to our welfare organisations and the heart of the communities for that additional support. But I'm conscious this regular updating may be quite different, and it'd be just useful just if there was to be any work on it or ongoing research with existing carers and new carers. I think that would be really, really important. Secondly, obviously I welcome the waiver, but thirdly, you had mentioned we haven't a decision on obviously the existing welfare mitigations and extending the benefit cap post 31st of March. We're waiting on a ministerial decision, but obviously within yourselves, you've said operationally, you're working away to ensure the processes. Can you, because I'm assuming there's existing processes already exist and have existed since back in 2020, I think. So what more ongoing work do you have to do? Do you be ready post the 31st of March from an operational point of view?
What we do is each year, and it's happened several times now, we've run what we call an extension exercise, which is a lot of these cases have an end date on our computer systems, and we run a sort of a bulk extension of these cases. And we'll likely be doing that around about January now, just that we'll push them on another year, because the schemes look like they're going to continue, so we keep giving ourselves another year of a buffer that the payments that are going out automatically will continue. And then, because it's better to do that, and if any decision arrived that they stopped, we could stop payments relatively quickly. So we build in a year's buffer, and approaching the sort of last quarter of each year, we'll automatically extend everybody's payments so it carries on.
Thank you.
And can I check that is what's happening? That is what's happening this time?
Multiple years now. It's ongoing every year, basically.
Yeah, and we're doing it at the minute.
And that applies even though the legislation contains March.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Leonora, I know today we're talking about the operational arrangements, but I was just wondering, under the monitoring and reporting to statutory arrangements, there was due to be a report laid before the Assembly at some time during the 12 months up to, or ending, on the 31st of March 2025 on the operational activities. Are we close to getting that operational report? Is that what's going to be used to inform the ministerial decision, on what potentially could be coming forward if it is extended? It's just, I'm very keen that we have no delays in any of those types of reports, so that the Assembly is aware of if there are any improvements or things that we should be doing differently. Are you aware when that report could be coming forward?
I'm not, actually. I'll take that away if you don't mind, and have policy colleagues write to you to confirm.
Yeah, it's just under the Welfare Reform Northern Ireland Order 2015, Article 137. That was a requirement, so it'd be good to see that operational report.
Yeah, and okay, thank you. And so is there a need for a strategy review that must have happened, and is that strategy review ongoing?
Sorry, strategy review?
In terms of the legislation expiring for the benefit cap in 2025,
All of those measures are wrapped up in the review that's currently been taken forward by policy colleagues in the department, which would be due, I think, it goes in the executive, but it needs to be done to allow the legislation to be made in advance of the sort of the current the current legislation.
Okay, members, we'll just check any other questions for Rory or Leonora. No. Okay, listen, thank you very much for coming to committee this morning, and really do appreciate that. And we can let you go ahead there. So members, I am going to shortly need to hand over to the Deputy Chair, but I just want, with members' agreement, if we could move to agenda item 12, the forward work programme, and just agree that. So members, there's a copy of the forward work programme at page 312. A clerk's memo on the proposed committee event on the arts is in your table paper at page 78. Do members have any comments on the memo, or are they content with the suggested format and plan for that event? Yeah, content, thank you. And do members have any comments or any other content they wish to note in the forward work programme, or are they content? Kelly?
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to ask about that issue with LCC that we brought up earlier, or I brought up earlier. Lisburn and Castlereagh Council and the work that they're doing on the landlord registration. I was just wondering if we might be able to fit that in somewhere relatively soon, because they'll be progressing with that.
Briefing?
Yeah.
For a briefing?
Schedule a briefing, Kelly?
Yes, please.
Members content that committee staff look at that? Okay, members, thank you. So I'm just going to hand over to the Deputy Chair of the committee before the next item. So I'll get out of the way, let you in here, Kelly. Oh, yes. Okay.
Celine, do you want to come forward? So members, the briefing paper now is at page 264. It's agenda item 9, and we have a briefing from the Northern Ireland Council of Voluntary Action. So I'd really like to welcome Celine McStravick, Chief Executive of NICFA. So Celine, I'm going to invite you, if that's okay, to make an opening statement, and then maybe we can move to questions from members. Is that okay?
Thank you, Vice Chair, and I really appreciate the time in the committee, and in particular delighted to hear you discussing the impending cliff edge for March 2025 as well, which is very dear to our hearts. Just to note that NICFA are the representative body for the community and voluntary sector in Northern Ireland. We have over 1,400 members. So you can imagine that our kind of issues are quite broad. The briefing for today is trying to specifically hone into some things that are particularly urgent. And you'll note that we have sent an addendum to our briefing note that was first provided on the 16th of September. So with permission, I'm just going to run through a few things to highlight, because things are changing rapidly. I'll start with the draft programme for government 24-27. And to note that NICFA worked with a number of organisations in Northern Ireland to bring over 100 people together to really, I suppose, bring together our consultation feedback to the Executive Office. We were quite disappointed at the lack of recognition of our sector underpinning economic and social development in Northern Ireland, and no reference to the unique value and expertise and the asset that this sector brings to delivering the outcomes across all of our communities. We would ask that any final programme for government should be much clearer on how this sector is involved in shaping and delivering programme priorities, and outline very clearly how an effective relationship between the sector and the government will be maintained going forth. A significant omission has to be the reference to poverty, and the committee have already started outlining why an anti-poverty strategy is so important, because things can drop through the gaps unless there's a planned approach to it. So our sector are really deeply concerned about the absence to any explicit commitments in the draft programme for government addressing poverty, despite the continued legal obligation for the executive to agree and implement an anti-poverty strategy for Northern Ireland. Just to note also, we are very mindful of the recent findings of the Public Accounts Committee on its report on child poverty in Northern Ireland in addition, and we would urge for an agreement for an anti-poverty strategy in year, working with the voluntary and community sector. Central to this must be the urgent agreement that our sector is actually resourced properly to support policy development across all government departments and work in full partnership with us. I also want to draw the committee's attention to growing concerns around the UK Share Prosperity funding, and you'll note that our budget, the UK-wide budget in October, there confirmed a transition year of funding for the UK Share Prosperity, but disappointingly, that is announced that the funding is to be significantly reduced. Just to remind members that the UK Share Prosperity was promised as a replacement to ESF funding post-Brexit, and of course we know there was a shortfall there already, so also reducing it further for this year of 25-26 will create real concerns within our sector. We would ask the committee support to put any pressure it can, not only on our Northern Ireland Executive, but on our colleagues in Westminster to ensure that our sector is protected as much as possible regarding that funding gap, but also to hear as soon as possible what that funding gap is. Here we are towards the end of November and we still do not know. Also, we're mindful that there are a number of other strategies happening in Northern Ireland, not least the Disability and Work Strategy, review of labour market partnerships, the Sub-Regional Economic Development Plan, which all obviously are about the pathway into employment and economic inactivity. Our sector is central to the solution for that, but yet we often feel ourselves waiting to be involved at a significant early time to provide any meaningful engagement. So we would ask the committee to maybe ask questions to other departments in terms of how they are actively engaging with our sector. That moves me on very quickly then to the future relationship with government. And just to note that the Joint Forum in Northern Ireland have produced a partnership agreement between the Northern Ireland Executive and the voluntary and community sector in Northern Ireland. This is seen as the successor to the previous Concordat, which you'll be familiar with. This work is now complete and with the Department for Communities, and we're hoping that it then moves to full Northern Ireland Executive approval very soon. Ideally, we would want to see explicit reference to this new partnership agreement within the final programme for government. That in itself would provide a framework that we could then reference regarding implementation of said partnership agreement and understand that the relationship between our sector and government is actually progressing and we are not asking for the same things over and over again. Most importantly, I'm sorry to note that the increase in national insurance contributions was something that our sector was not prepared to hear in the most recent October 25 budget. The Chancellor announced that the national employer contributions will increase, and this will significantly affect all costs in our sector. Unlike public sector organisations, including the health service and local government, where these budget changes should be reimbursed, as it stands, the voluntary and community sector organisations will not have this protection, and we will have to absorb the budget impact of these changes. NICFA have gone out to all of our members to ask for actual evidence regarding the impact on budgets. And again, we have empirical evidence that we will be providing to the committee in summary form, showing the huge impact on individual organisations. From some saying it will impact them by at least 50,000 right up until £500,000 a year. There is no source for this money. This will impact, this will create redundancies, this will create staff cuts, and that means that we will have less services provided. Your committee will be really aware that our sector fill those gaps. We are part of the market failure here in terms of public sector delivery, so this will have a huge impact on citizens. Our concerns have been raised via the Public Accounts Committee too. I'm happy to note that I am meeting the Minister for Finance, Minister for Communities and Minister for Economy all together in one room next week, and that will be part of our agenda. I would ask for the committee's help in any way in terms of raising the profile of this issue. We're not asking for any special treatment. We're being asked to be treated exactly the same as our public sector, because in theory, and all of those good words that are often said to us, we are partners in delivery, but on this occasion it doesn't feel like we are partners at all. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Celine. And I have to declare an interest in the sense that my previous career was in community development, working quite closely with a range of community organisations, managing a range of community programmes, and also being a member of NICFA. So I'll just declare that interest. I suppose I think you've, Celine, has been really, really comprehensive in the sense of the importance of the CMV sector, and particularly in relation to the draft programme for government. I think it's loud and clear, whereby the sector does need to is integral across all the priorities across the area and the delivery with the public sector, and there should be equal value given to the core work that you do. You had also mentioned the delivery of the social inclusion strategies, and you're well aware as a department and the committee have reiterated with the department the critical importance of driving those forward, and likewise the anti-poverty strategy, which you have been all actively engaged in, and I know the Minister has agreed that should be going forward shortly and out for consultation come early new year. And we have reiterated that's important the department re-engage with yourselves as well in relation to the anti-poverty strategy. The UK Prosperity Fund, I would be interested to know what is the impact. We know it was reduced, but overall, what does it look like? Even if, is there a generic figure for here in the north for the range of projects currently run, what that deficit could be? That would probably be one question. I'm going to open to the floor, and I'll just go to a second question is regarding the new partnership agreement. I'd love to know, is there much change in relation to the previous Concorda through this joint forum? Is there much tweak or change? So maybe they have two questions, and then I will open to the floor. I think we have 3 or 4 members who would like to ask you a few questions.
Okay, I'll answer first on UK shared prosperity and what do we know, and I think this is part of the frustration. I'm part of the Northern Ireland UK Shared Prosperity Regional Board here, so we had our meeting on Tuesday, and even at that stage we don't know. We are told by civil servants that papers are still with Minister Norris and decision is still to be made. We do know it'll be a reduction. We don't know exactly how much, but we know groups have been asked to consider what they can deliver in the year 25-26 with less money, but not how much less. So if you can imagine the pressure on groups already, understanding that post-March they're going to have to reduce what they're doing. But at the same time, demand is always increasing, particularly with those most vulnerable groups that economic activity projects are reaching. People with long-term disability, long-term health conditions, women, young people. So the uncertainty is hugely unhelpful, to say the least.
And you have no idea, did I know we ourselves? We have asked
We're told
as well.
imminently.
Right.
We're told imminently, but very disappointing that we have a budget announced end of October and we're still sitting here a few weeks later not knowing. So that's not helpful.
Well, thank you for that. And in relation then to the new partnership agreement?
Mm-hmm. The new partnership agreement has taken over 18 months to develop. It will still have the same kind of core values as on the Concordat, but I think what it does is more explicitly describe what those values would look like in terms of implementation. So it feels a bit broader to me, a bit more detailed, and that just allows behaviours to be called to account and outlines very clearly expectations on both sides, from government and from our sector, which is helpful. It also incorporates a set of fair funding principles. So again, it talks about, the kind of treatment and respect that the sector should have, and also what our government can and can't do. So I would see it as really significant progress, and the joint forum should really be commended for that amount of work. And I'm really looking forward to it moving with endorsement of the Minister for Communities onwards across government. And actually, we want to go on to the next stage, which is, well, how do we know it's working, and how do we actually have an annual report on it to make sure, unlike the last Concordat, it becomes a dynamic document that actually enacts some change.
Thank you. I'm going to open to members, and we have Brian first, and then it'll be Morris and Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. And well, like Ciara, I worked for many years in the voluntary and community sector, and I'm sure, like probably every member of the committee, I'm involved and a member of some voluntary sector groups, both groups that are voluntary and those that are employing people and operating as social economy. So, and I think across the Assembly there's very, very strong recognition of the voluntary and community sector, and I say that sincerely, but you want to see that demonstrated in practice and practical means. So there certainly is, I would say, strong recognition of the value of the voluntary community sector, and not just in terms of what it does for society, but in terms of delivery of projects that can be more effectively delivered through voluntary sector groups to better effect than through statutory sector, you know. So in terms of the programme for government, just to say, I know you will know this, it's not an encyclopedia of all that the government is doing. It's 9 particular priorities over the next 2.5 years that the executive wants to focus on. So I've heard various groups saying, oh, our particular interest isn't mentioned, you know, or our particular concerns aren't highlighted as a priority. That doesn't mean there's lots of other things will be happening. It's picking out 9 particular areas of work that the executive is wishing to advance, but I know you'll be aware of that. So but still, your comment, if you're saying there's not recognition of voluntary and community sector specifically, I mean, certainly that should be in there, you know. And but as I say, I think it's understood it's not, as I say, a whole encyclopedia of everything, because there's things this committee is doing and will be doing that won't actually be mentioned in the programme of government, because it's just part of our routine of legislation and ongoing work. I think Ciara said the anti-poverty strategy, the Minister is saying that will come forward in January. Even that, of course, will be a priority. Shared prosperity funding, very much, I mean, I think it's a 40% reduction. It's been said we have written to the Department, to Minister Norris, requesting detail, and we've had particularly the employability support groups in, and we're very aware of the important work they're doing.
Brian, I'm sorry, we
okay.
are rushed. Have you got a question for Celine?
Well, in terms of the joint forum, I wanted to ask more about that. So it's not actually active yet then?
Oh yes, the joint forum has existed for over 20 years.
Was it Concordat though? Was it previously? Is it now in a new? Can you tell? Is it now changing its operation or its purpose?
Well, the joint forum has always been there as a vehicle to discuss between government and our sector kind of key issues that are relevant at that time. While we didn't have the Assembly and the Executive in place last year, the joint forum wanted to look at the Concordat and update it, so that became a large body of the work plan. And that's where the new partnership agreement then emerged, as you know, just as a way by update. It felt dated, and in fact the people who had signed the Concordat often aren't in the sector anymore, so it was really relevant. So the joint forum comprises of a voluntary and community sector panel, and then representatives from every government department. So there's no doubt that over the past year it has become, you know, even more relevant. I think in the absence of government and the not vacuum, it felt even more important to be working so closely with our civil servants. But now, since February, that we have our government back, we see the emerging partnership agreement and funding principles as a really useful framework, you know, because we want to actually deal with shared challenges together. It's not about being done unto or waiting to hear. Our sector are absolutely ready to roll up our sleeves and get involved in solving some of these really sticky issues that we all face. So the joint forum meet, you know, at least once a quarter. Once a quarter, yes. And the VCS panel of it will meet even more often than that. So I see that over the next year, the work plan will become quite intense regarding the implementation of the partnership agreement and other things as well. When there's public consultations, etc., often the joint forum is a space to go to have those kind of pre-consultation conversations. It's a really useful space. We have just recently closed recruitment for new members to the voluntary and community sector panel, and I think it actually demonstrates the relevance of the joint forum that we were oversubscribed for panel members. I mean, I have an excellent representative kind of group there coming together.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Morris?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a few questions, with your permission, Chair, and I'd like to go straight into them. So what steps do you think can be taken to ensure that funding gaps caused by cuts or reallocations in various government departments do not disproportionately harm the voluntary sector organisations? And how do you think that the programme for government can better address the gaps identified in poverty alleviation and support marginalised groups and social inclusion strategies? And what role should the VCS play in shaping these priorities? And a final one, if I could squeeze it in, Chair. What immediate actions do you think the Department for Communities and the Northern Ireland Executive can take to finalise and implement a robust anti-poverty strategy? And should you be involved in the co-design of that strategy?
Okay, shall I take the first question? First question about, how we're going to mitigate against cuts to our sector. I only wish we knew the answer to that, and I'll be really honest with the committee, we struggle continually with that despite the kind words about how important our sector is, there's no doubt that when cuts are to be made, we're the first ones that feel those cuts. And that term discretionary funding is, I suppose, pointing to where our sector fits in terms of the decision making. When the Northern Ireland budget came out this year, our sector were heavily involved in responses to the quality impact assessments. And in fact, NICFA convened several meetings with our sector to make sure we supported the responses to those quality impact assessments. And we were really clear that it is often our groups and the people that we work with that are affected the most. So what we can do is work directly with ministers and committees to continually to highlight that. But I think it's really important that when budgets come out from departments, that they themselves are clear about the value they place on our sector centrally, and then as a result what actions they're taking to actually prove that point. Forgive me, I'm trying to remember the next question. The next one.
Around the programme for government being better to address the gaps identified in poverty alleviation and marginalised groups and social inclusion strategies, and what role you think that the VCS should play in shaping these priorities?
Well, notwithstanding that we understand the programme for government isn't a long shopping list, and neither should it be. It should have a clear priority. But I think alleviating poverty should be one of those priorities, or underpinning all of them. There's absolutely no point in moving our society forward when we have the highest rates of child poverty, etc. In society. The anti-poverty strategy should be absolutely pushed forward as quickly as possible, and our sector was central in the co-design of that, and in fact we worked together very much so with the department. We weren't often delighted with the outcomes, and we created many documents to support more evidence-based implementation of that, so we would like to see that pre-Christmas. That is really, really urgent. And as I said, given the previous conversation regarding the cliff edge and the benefits cap, that's a perfect example whereby in the absence of a strategy, things can happen almost accidentally because we aren't planning for what we should be doing. So yes, the VCS sector should be central to all of these core decisions. And I would actually argue that I'm not sure how any policy can be developed in Northern Ireland, no matter what it is, that does not involve our sector. Whether it's arts and culture, environment, infrastructure, early intervention, prevention. I would challenge anyone to find any department's policy that our sector aren't there as the kind of either the voice of the user or the frontline delivery of support.
Thank you very much. You've answered the third question in your answer to the second question. That was that you are involved in the co-design of the strategy. But
it's 13 hours.
Given where we're at now, what do you think the Department of Communities could do to better support the sector in navigating increased operational costs? And you have mentioned national insurance contributions going up, etc. So how do you see that what we as a committee can do for our department to help you along the way?
I think there has to be an acceptance by the Department for Communities and other departments that if our costs are increasing due to a national insurance increase and the real living wage increase, that we can't be seen to actually accept that burden. It is literally impossible. Any procurement by government, any commission contracts, any grants have to increase accordingly. We can't be seen to be actually absorbing and literally subsidising government. That's the way we would be if the grants and contracts value do not increase. That's where we would be. But also I think the committee could support us by advocating directly with the Treasury in Westminster to say that we want to be treated the same as the public sector. It is shameful that charities are having to bear the burden of these salary increases, and they are hugely significant. I look forward to sharing our research in this area in the next week or so with the committee, the actual case studies from organisations that are nothing short of frightening in terms of impact, and we cannot find this money. You know, with rising costs and decreasing funding, there's only one outcome, and it is going to have to be redundancies in this sector, which in itself will then increase the burden on the public sector. We know that.
Thank you very much. It will be it will impact severely on any service delivery that you are up to at the minute. Thank you very much for your answers, and Chair, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Morris, and we've on now to Kelly, and then Shan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Celine. Glad to see you here. As you said when your opening preamble, we are partners in delivery. This committee in the past has had a fantastic working relationship with NICFA, and long may it continue. What I would ask is, in order for us to be enabled to be a partner with you in delivery, that some of the meetings that are being scheduled are clashing with our committee meeting, and that there would be reconsideration, that those meetings take account of the pressures within the Assembly, whether it's plenary day or the committee meeting day, because I know I've been reached out to by a number of organisations accusing me of not attending, and I've said, well, to be honest, I have a statutory responsibility as an MLA to attend the committee. I can't be all places at one time, but it's just if you could take account of that. Like Cara, declare an interest. I was in the community and voluntary sector for over 20 years before I became an MLA, a member of NICFA, and actually was involved in the initial Concordat agreement. One of the things that would help us, Celine, we absolutely understand that fair funding arrangements must mean that where there are staff being paid, that there should be a fair level of pay. And we've heard from, for instance, frontline workers that they haven't had pay increases included in their grant for over 10 years, which is astonishing. And now we have this national insurance coming forward from Treasury. What would help us is not hearing about how much it's going to cost, but it's actually what the impact will be of this rise. So, for instance, organisation X, without an appropriate recognition of the cost to employ someone, it will mean the reduction of. So we know that you're being asked to do more and more for less, and it's not fair. And to be honest, one of the things I can think, I'm not going to speak on behalf of all of the committee, but I think most of us agree that fair pay for the work that is done is necessary in order to keep skilled people within your sector. These are people who are the lifeline and the backbone of our community, and we certainly want to keep them there. So anything we can do to support, but we need the other half of the argument of this is without making the grant payment increase in line with the costs that are being put onto the sector, it will mean that there will be a reduction in XYZ. Also, I'd be very keen to hear from you about the other departments' involvement, because quite often our executive work in a bit of a silo where community and voluntary sector, yes, they do work for health, they do work in education, they do work, to be honest, everywhere, but it falls to communities. And I'd be very interested to hear what input there is from other departments when you're trying to talk to them about the costs and the grant increases that are required in order to deliver, even just to stand still.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate that comment about clashing meetings. We will absolutely try our utmost to avoid that if we can. And I suppose I'll offer some reassurance on our kind of empirical evidence gathering that we're doing regarding national insurance, that to our members we sent out a number of questions in the survey, not least the kind of absolute cost of the increased national insurance to the organisation, but we then asked, on what impact will this have on your beneficiaries? So we are gathering that. We have over 100 responses. I'm just sitting looking at the spreadsheet at the minute, and we want to make sure that's written up properly and really distilled. And we have some organisations. We offered anonymity because obviously some of the financials organisations may not want to share it. But interestingly, lots of organisations said, we don't want to remain anonymous. Please tell people what's actually impacting us as an organisation. So we will be sharing that in a week or so, if that's okay, Kelly. We just want to make sure we've dotted the I's and crossed the T's on that one before we go live. And we anticipate press coverage in this as well. So we wanted to make sure the evidence was strong. In terms of the other departments, as soon as the budget was announced, I wrote to our Minister for Economy and Finance and Communities. We're really conscious that it often just falls to the Communities Department, and actually, even if we think of actually health being a huge net contributor to our sector as well, so it is absolutely cross-departmental. Where we are focusing on our Finance Minister in terms of being able to put pressure on the Treasury as well to really consider the impact on our sector, and also to note that we're working with what we call our sister organisations across the UK. So SCVO in Scotland, WCVO in Wales, and NCVO in England as well, where all four of us are coming together to really show the impact across the whole of the UK. There's not a single voluntary community organisation that will not be really impacted by this, particularly given, that I suppose perfect storm of COVID, cost of living, lack of coming out of one government into another government. It has been our sector that has had to withstand all of those pressures. This one is just one too far. We're not sure how we're going to survive this one. So hopefully that answers, Kelly, but yeah, we're putting pressure on all departments. And the NIO, sorry, can I add?
I would just say that the Concordat agreement the last time when it was signed by Martin McGuinness and Peter Robinson, it was very effective having the First Minister and Deputy First Ministers doing that. I know I had asked that the Concordat through communities could be signed by all ministers again, just to ensure that all are aware of the requirements that they need to make. Because, as you say, the community and voluntary sector, it's that, I used to say this about my transport companies, it's the pivotal role that enables community to survive. And to be quite frank, government would collapse in a heartbeat if we didn't have the community and voluntary sector. So fair funding arrangements is key to enable that partnership to be delivered. And I would say the Communities Committee here would be 100% behind asking for fair pay arrangements and fair grant arrangements for organisations, and where there are contracts, fair contract arrangements too. Yeah.
I would just add one further comment that I know our sector underpins kind of communities and economic and social development, but also I think our sector has a lot to add in new policy development, and that's often where we're left behind, and we are thought of, at the consultation stage rather than the policy development stage. And I suppose that's relevant as well to public transformation. When we hear about the public transformation fund that's happening at the moment, I would be particularly concerned that our sector nowhere near any of that innovation discussion, what could happen differently, what efficiencies could be offered within our own public sector. So if there's anything the committee would like to do in terms of ask questions about that, we'd really welcome your interest.
Thank you, Kelly. Move on now to Shan.
Yeah, no, between Morris and Kelly, my questions were answered, so I don't think I can add anything of value.
Okay. I suppose just to summarise, and I think that's pertinent where you ended regarding transformation, because we constantly must involve in change, and the feeling that the sector hasn't been part of. I'm wondering, as a committee, is it something that we could ask each of the departments in relation to what role or what part of our involvement with the community and voluntary sector partners have been in their current transformational programmes that they've put forward? I think that's one question. Likewise, you'd mentioned you are doing a lot of research on the impact, but I think likewise you should be able to ask the departments what do they foresee the impact will be. First and foremost from a financial perspective, given their existing grants and programmes that they heavily rely on to deliver key services for the people across the north, whether it's environment, health, as you say, education, family support, all of those services. So they need to be the departments need to do their due diligence and need to be assessing the risks moving forward as well. Even though I very much going to welcome the report, and I have met with a number of organisations, not just recently, given the announcement, 3 months earlier, worried about announcements. Where, and these are huge organisations delivering amazing services for such vulnerable people, and they were basically saying they may have to close their doors.
Absolutely.
That's the scale of it, and it would be a huge gap of service for people, particularly in Derry, where I represent. So is there, in asking the departments around the transformational bids, is there another question that we could ask in relation to what risk assessment they have done if the likes of support cannot be provided to their community and voluntary sector partners across the range of grants in relation to NIC?
No, it would give some comfort to our sector if we even thought the government departments were already thinking about how they could mitigate against that impact, you know, and understood that it was part of their role, that we can't be expected just to absorb those higher costs. There was a question from the Public Accounts Committee to Department for Finance recently at their committee meeting, and I know there was a question on the floor to the Finance Minister as well, whether the Department for Finance had considered any research in terms of the impact in the voluntary community sector and had they worked with NICFA. So I've seen the response to that, but even the fact that NICFA are doing this within a very tight budget, I'm looking at a deficit, you know, us and ourselves completely stretched. So it's very, very difficult to even respond to those questions when our own team has got vacant posts.
Kelly just wants, Kelly just wants back in there just before we...
Sorry, just very quickly, Chair, when we're writing to the other departments, it would be worthwhile, as you're saying there, you know, we're going to ask them about the impacts that they have identified, but it's also what plans are they putting in place to meet the costs that have been incurred by this increase through the budget. Because I'm just concerned, and Celine will know this, that if you got £20,000, you will still get £20,000, but the cost to deliver has gone up significantly. So the actual delivery on the ground is vastly reduced, but just purely because the costs have gone up. We've seen it, construction industry, we've seen it in lots of different places, and there's a recognition of cost increases, but because it's people and volunteers and community workers, it doesn't seem to be being recognised. So if we could ask maybe the departments, what plans are they putting in place to ensure that the additional costs coming through the budget are going to be met?
Just one final one from me. I'm just curious. The general the funding database that did exist for all community voluntary organisations did receive a grant. Does that still exist? Because I'm conscious of you could press a button probably and get an analysis. Is that still in existence? Is that...
You mean the one that's kind of within the civil service, the kind of public sector funding one? I'm, as far as I know, it still exists. I'm not sure if it's kept up to date or how much it's used, but that, you know, again, another useful question to the department.
I would...
It'd be outside my remit, you know.
Because I know as an organisation, when we were I could press a button and have a list of across all the departments, what grants my organisation was currently holding. It was the government funders database, so I'd probably just
grant
give more...
tracker, was it?
No, it's the
grant
government...
Grant tracker's the NICFA one.
No, it's different. It's the government
It's
government
the
grants
government one.
database. Government Government Funders Database.
Government funders database.
And that was across the whole of all government departments. So I'm just wondering where that's at.
Yeah,
It may have
that's a
fallen away,
useful
I'm not too
question.
sure, but it'll be a useful piece of,
Status of it.
yeah, the status of it for data, because it's about enabling, and the more data you have, the more effective you can see the scale of the community and voluntary sector and the role and the collaboration that they play with each of the government departments. So if there's no further questions, can I thank you very much, Celine? That was really, really good, and thank you for raising key areas of work. And we look forward to working closely with yourselves and your organisations moving forward, and we'll be keen with regards to the new partnership arrangement and signing off on that, to be part of that and be kept up to date as well on that work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, members.
Completed 10.
Yeah.
We completed 11.
11. So we're just
We completed
did it 12.
so it's just-
So we just move on to agenda item 13. Is there any other business from any member? No? Okay. So date, time, location. of
Sorry,
next-
Chair.
Yes, Kelly.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I know that yourself and myself yesterday were at the housing rights, what is it called, the private rented sector conference. I will be going this weekend again. I don't know, maybe you're going as well to the final day of the Citizens Initiative, Citizens Assembly on housing.
Yes. Yeah, it's in the Guildhall. I'm hoping to be there. I've registered to attend as an observer.
Just for the record, Kelly, or have you a question? You just seem to drop out.
No, that was just for the
Okay,
record, just to
thank you.
highlight that
Yeah.
we've been at those. It's just so that anybody that's listening knows that we are keeping up to date on things outside of the committee.
Okay, thank you.
And I suppose it's just to commend, as Kelly had mentioned, commend housing rights, who play such a pivotal role in relation to supporting ourselves, even as MLAs, with our constituents who do call into the office in relation to key housing issues. But also just commend the event yesterday. It's their 11th annual conference that they've held, and it was about innovation within the private rented sector, and just the range of organisations and partners that were there. It was really, really intensive day, but a lot of good presentations, speakers, panel discussions and workshops. And the department was there as well in relation to, I participated in the workshop regarding the energy efficiency legislation being moved forward. So it was the first workshop that the department have done on that. So it was really, really good. And then likewise, I suppose, as Kelly will agree with me, Renters Voice, they are just fantastic. And it's a group of local people sharing their experience quite confidently, very articulate, just the experts when it comes to the private rented sector. So just a commend both Housing Rights and Renters Voice for the fantastic event that it was. And I learned a lot as well, and I'm sure Kelly will agree. So thank you. And I'm just going to now, so the date of the next meeting will be 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 28th of November in room 29, Parliament Buildings. And the meeting is now adjourned. So thank you.
Committee Room 29, sound.